You're sitting in a school cafeteria laughing with friends when suddenly someone yanks your shirt from behind. But this isn't just any cruel prank. It's deeply personal, humiliating, and the moment is being recorded by security cameras overhead. By the end of this story, you'll understand how one girl's courage, one grainy security tape, and an unexpected alliance exposed decades of buried secrets in a small Michigan town and brought down not just the school's worst bullies, but an entire system built to protect them. The early October air carried the first hints of autumn chill as Sofia Martinez pedaled her second-hand bicycle along Foundry Road. At 17, she moved through the world like a shadow, quiet, unassuming, and easily overlooked. The rusted skeleton of the old Oak Ridge steel mill loomed to her right, its broken windows staring like vacant eyes across the river valley. Once this mill had been the beating heart of the town, providing jobs for 3 generations of Oak Ridge families, including her grandfather, who had arrived here in 1962, seeking the American dream. Sophia's tires crunched over fallen leaves as she navigated the familiar path to Oak Ridge High School. Built in 1952 during the height of Cold War paranoia, the school stood as a testament to another era: solid brick walls, narrow corridors, and according to local legend, a network of fallout shelters beneath its foundations. Most students complained about the outdated building, but Sophia found comfort in its worn corners and quiet spaces. She locked her bike in the nearly empty rack. Most kids in Oak Ridge had cars by senior year, or at least friends with cars. Sophia had neither. She adjusted her soft blue cardigan, a thrift store find that had become her armor against the world, and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. In her backpack, alongside textbooks and homework, sat her sketchbook, her true refuge. "Morning, Miss Martinez," called a gravelly voice as she passed the security desk. Frank Sullivan sat in his usual spot, a newspaper folded beside a steaming cup of black coffee. At 67, with steel-gray hair and weathered hands, he cut an imposing figure despite his age. Most students gave him a wide berth, intimidated by his no-nonsense demeanor and the rumors that he'd been a hard-nosed detective before becoming the school's head of security. "Morning, Mr. Sullivan," Sophia replied softly, offering a small smile. Frank had always been kind to her in his gruff way. Unlike the other security guards, who seemed perpetually distracted by their phones, Frank watched everything with alert eyes that missed nothing. Some kids called him the eagle behind his back, but Sophia appreciated his vigilance. In a school where invisibility was her chosen defense, she found it oddly comforting that at least one person seemed to notice her existence. The morning passed in a blur of classes. Sophia excelled academically, but participated minimally, answering only when directly called upon. By lunch period, she had already weathered the casual indifference of another day at Oak Ridge High. The cafeteria buzzed with the controlled chaos of teenage life, laughter erupting in bursts, the clatter of trays, shouted conversations across tables. Sophia navigated to her usual spot in the far corner, a table partially hidden by a structural column. She unwrapped her peanut butter sandwich and opened her sketchbook. Today, she was working on a detailed rendering of the school library, capturing the way afternoon light filtered through its tall windows onto the worn oak tables. The library was her sanctuary, the one place in school where silence was not just tolerated, but enforced. Across the cafeteria, Bradley Thompson held court at the central table, surrounded by his usual entourage. At 18, Bradley embodied everything Oak Ridge valued: star quarterback, student body, president, and son of Mayor Richard Thompson, whose family had essentially run the town for 3 generations. Bradley's laughter carried across the room, commanding attention like everything else about him. Sophia kept her head down, pencil moving in careful strokes across the paper. She'd learned long ago that invisibility was safety. Be quiet. be unremarkable, and maybe they'd leave you alone. It had worked for most of her high school years. But today, something shifted in the carefully maintained balance of her world. She didn't notice Bradley approach until his shadow fell across her sketchbook. Her pencil faltered mid-stroke. "What have we got here, Martinez?" Bradley's voice carried that particular tone of false friendliness that always preceded cruelty. "Always scribbling in that book. You writing love poems about me." His friends laughed on cue. Sophia kept her eyes on her drawing heart, hammering against her ribs. If she didn't engage, maybe he'd lose interest. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Bradley placed his palms flat on the table, leaning into her space. His varsity jacket smelled of expensive cologne and entitlement. "It's just drawings," Sophia murmured, finally looking up. "For art class." Something in Bradley's eyes hardened. He'd expected fear, not calm response. "Let's see, then." Before she could react, he snatched the sketchbook. Sophia reached for it instinctively, then froze as Bradley flipped through the pages with deliberate slowness, his friends crowding behind him. "Look at this. Little Miss Nobody thinks she's an artist." He held up a detailed sketch of the town's abandoned railway station. Bunch of depressing crap. Sophia swallowed hard. Those drawings were the one thing that was truly hers. "Please give it back." "Please give it back," Bradley mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "What'll you do for it, Martinez?" The cafeteria had grown quieter, attention shifting toward their corner. This was exactly what Sophia had always avoided, becoming a spectacle, a target. She reached for her sketchbook again, and Bradley pulled it away, laughing. "Too slow," he taunted. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when reviewing the security footage, they would need to slow it down to fully capture the sequence. Bradley circled behind Sophia, the sketchbook still in one hand. As she turned to follow his movement, he reached out with his free hand and grabbed the back of her cardigan. With a swift, practiced motion, he yanked her bra strap and let it snap back against her skin. The sound seemed to echo in Sophia's ears. Sharp pain radiated across her back, but it was nothing compared to the burning humiliation that flooded her face. Her sandwich fell to the floor. Her pencil rolled under the table. Around her, laughter erupted, not everyone, but enough. Enough to make the world spin. "Lighten up, Martinez," Bradley chuckled, dropping her sketchbook onto her tray. "It's just a joke." But it wasn't a joke. It was a violation. Sophia sat frozen, unable to move, as tears threatened to spill. Every pair of eyes in the cafeteria seemed to be on her, some laughing, some uncomfortable, most simply looking away, pretending they hadn't seen. Not a single teacher was present. The lunch monitors, college-aged assistants, more interested in their phones than their responsibilities, hadn't noticed a thing. Finally, muscles responding to her desperate need to escape, Sophia grabbed her backpack and fled, leaving her tray and sketchbook behind. She didn't stop until she reached the second-floor girls' bathroom, locking herself in the furthest stall. Only then did she allow the tears to come pressing her sleeve against her mouth to muffle the sound. She hated herself for not fighting back, for not screaming at him, for being too stunned to do anything but run. Most of all, she hated that no one had helped her. No one ever did. What Sophia didn't know, what Bradley couldn't have known, was that the entire incident had been captured by the school's newly upgraded security camera system. And someone was watching. Frank Sullivan was not supposed to be monitoring the cafeteria feed that afternoon. He'd been tasked with reviewing footage from the previous night, when the varsity basketball team had allegedly snuck into the gym for an unauthorized practice session. But a movement on the cafeteria monitor had caught his eye, a familiar blue cardigan, a group of boys approaching a solitary figure. He'd watched the entire incident unfold, in real time, his weathered face hardening with each passing second. When Bradley Thompson snapped Sophia's bra strap, Frank's coffee mug hit the desk with enough force to crack its handle. "Not on my watch," he muttered, eyes fixed on the screen as Sophia fled the cafeteria. "Not again." 20 years earlier, Frank's niece, Catherine, had taken her own life after enduring months of relentless bullying at her high school in Detroit. She'd been 15. The school had dismissed her parents' concerns, calling it typical teenage drama. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Frank had been a detective then, and he'd promised himself that he would never again stand by while a child suffered. It was the reason he'd taken this job after retirement, despite the substantial pay cut and loss of status. He saved the video file to a secure folder and printed several still frames that clearly showed Bradley's actions. Then, he picked up his desk phone and dialed the principal's office. "Barbara, it's Frank. We need to talk now." Their principal, Barbara Reynolds, had led Oak Ridge High for 15 years with a carefully maintained balance of discipline and politics. At 59, with carefully styled blonde hair and a collection of sensible pantsuits, she projected an image of approachable authority. In reality, she was a master of bureaucratic navigation, particularly when it came to the town's influential families. "This is serious, Frank," she said, studying the printouts spread across her desk. "Very serious." "It's assault," Frank stated flatly. "Clear as day." Barbara removed her reading glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. "It's not that simple. Bradley Thompson is—" "I don't care if he's the president's son," Frank interrupted. "What he did was wrong. We have it on video. The policy is clear." The policy was indeed clear. The student handbook, revised just last year after pressure from the state education department, explicitly categorized unwanted physical contact of a sexual nature as grounds for immediate suspension pending further disciplinary action. But Barbara Reynolds knew that policies in Oak Ridge often bent when they collided with certain last names. "We need to speak with Sophia first," she said finally. "Get her statement before we proceed." Frank nodded curtly. He'd expected this delay tactic. "I'll bring her in." "No," Barbara countered quickly. "Let me handle this properly. We'll call her in tomorrow morning. Follow protocol exactly." Her eyes held a warning. "This needs to be by the book, Frank. The Thompsons have 3 lawyers on retainer." Frank left the principal's office with a simmering unease. He'd seen this dance before: the careful language, the procedural delays, the subtle shift from victim protection to damage control. He returned to his security office and made 2 copies of the video file, one on a secure flash drive that he tucked into his wallet, another uploaded to his personal cloud storage. In Oak Ridge, evidence had a way of disappearing when it implicated certain people. That evening, as Sophia picked at her dinner in the small kitchen of the Martinez home, her father studied her with concern. Roberto Martinez had raised his daughter alone since her mother left when Sophia was 9. A former Navy mechanic with strong hands and gentle eyes, he'd built a life for them working at the local auto repair shop, taking every overtime shift available to provide for his daughter. "You're quiet tonight, mija," he observed, pushing his plate aside. "Something happened at school." Sophia shrugged, moving peas around her plate. "Just tired." Roberto didn't press further. At 45, the lines around his eyes had deepened, his black hair now streaked with gray at the temples. The divorce had taught him patience. His military service had taught him observation. Something was wrong, but he knew his daughter well enough to give her space. "I'm working late tomorrow," he said instead. "Johnson's transmission came in finally. You okay? Getting dinner?" Sophia nodded, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be fine, Dad. I might stay late at the library anyway. Later alone in her bedroom, Sophia stood before the mirror examining the red mark on her shoulder where the strap had snapped against her skin. It would fade by morning, unlike the memory which she knew would linger much longer. She changed into her pajamas and crawled into bed, clutching her spare sketchbook, the one she kept at home. She drew until midnight, not her usual careful studies, but harsh, angular shapes that captured her rage and humiliation. When sleep finally came, it was fitful and filled with dreams of running down endless school corridors, pursued by laughter. Morning brought a summons to the principal's office. The note came during first period English, delivered by a nervous office aide. Sophia felt her stomach drop as she read it. She'd never been called to the principal's office before. The walk down the central hallway felt impossibly long. Students between classes parted around her like water around a stone, a few glancing curiously at the official note in her hand. Outside the administrative suite, she hesitated, taking a deep breath before pushing through the heavy door. Mrs. Winters, the school secretary, for as long as anyone could remember, peered at her over rhinestone reading glasses. "Go right in, dear. They're expecting you." Sophia wondered, her anxiety spiking. Inside Principal Reynolds' office, 3 people awaited her. The principal sat behind her large desk, while Frank Sullivan occupied one of the visitor chairs. The third person, a girl Sophia vaguely recognized as new to the school, stood by the window. "Sophia, thank you for coming," Principal Reynolds began with practiced warmth. "This is Jenny Williams. She transferred here last month from Lincoln High in Grand Rapids. And, of course, you know Mr. Sullivan." Sophia nodded, remaining standing just inside the doorway. "Am I in trouble?" "No, not at all," the principal assured her. "Please, sit down." Frank Sullivan's eyes hadn't left her face since she entered. There was something in his expression, concern certainly, but also a fierce determination that made Sophia uncomfortable. "We need to ask you about an incident in the cafeteria yesterday," he said once she had settled into the empty chair. Sophia's throat tightened. She glanced at Jenny Williams, confused by her presence. "We have it on video," Frank continued gently. "What Bradley Thompson did to you, pulling your undergarment and letting it snap back, that's not acceptable behavior. It's not a joke or a prank. It's harassment." The direct acknowledgement of what had happened made Sophia's eyes burn with sudden tears. She'd expected to be ignored, to have her experience dismissed, as she'd seen happen to others. "I didn't do anything to provoke him," she said quietly. "Of course you didn't," Principal Reynolds interjected smoothly. "No one is suggesting that." Frank shifted forward. "Sophia, I need to know if you're willing to make a formal statement about what happened. This kind of behavior violates our school policies, and there are consequences." Sophia hesitated, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. Bradley Thompson wasn't just any student. His father controlled half the town. His family had donated the new football field. The Thompsons had streets named after them in Oak Ridge. "What would happen to him?" she asked. An uncomfortable silence followed. Principal Reynolds cleared her throat. "That would depend on several factors. Our disciplinary committee would review the evidence and your statement, then make a recommendation." Frank's jaw tightened visibly at this bureaucratic answer. "The policy calls for immediate suspension at minimum," he stated flatly. The principal shot him a warning look before turning back to Sophia with a professional smile. "We're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need your account of what happened." "I didn't think anyone would care," Sophia whispered, the admission escaping before she could stop it. "We care," Frank said firmly. "What happened to you matters." It was then that Jenny Williams spoke for the first time. "He did the same thing to me at a party last weekend," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "and to Amber Collins in gym class last month. We've all been too scared to say anything." Sophia stared at her in surprise. She'd had no idea Bradley's behavior was a pattern. The realization that she wasn't alone, that others had experienced the same violation, shifted something inside her. The isolation that had wrapped around her since yesterday began to crack. "I'll make a statement," she decided, straightening in her chair. "I want to tell what happened." The process took nearly an hour. Sophia described the incident in detail, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Principal Reynolds recorded her statement, occasionally asking for clarification. Frank remained silent, but watchful, his presence oddly reassuring. Afterward, as Sophia and Jenny were about to leave, Frank placed a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "And you're not alone in this. I promise." Something in his tone, a personal edge to the professional assurance, made Sophia wonder about the story behind Frank Sullivan's fierce protectiveness. But before she could respond, the office door burst open. Mayor Richard Thompson filled the doorway, his imposing frame accentuated by an expensive suit and the righteous indignation of the powerful inconvenienced. Behind him, Barbara Reynolds' secretary hovered anxiously. "I'm sorry he insisted," she began, but the mayor cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Barbara, what's this I hear about Bradley being accused of something?" His gaze swept the room, narrowing when it landed on Frank. "Sullivan, should have known you'd be involved." Principal Reynolds rose quickly. "Richard, we were just concluding a meeting. Perhaps we could speak privately in a moment." "These are the girls." The mayor's attention shifted to Sophia and Jenny, who had instinctively moved closer together. "The ones making accusations against my son." Frank stepped between them. "Mayor Thompson, this is an official school disciplinary matter. These students have a right to privacy and due process." "Don't lecture me about process, Sullivan," Thompson snapped. "Not when you're railroading my boy over some teenage nonsense." Sophia felt herself shrinking under the mayor's scrutiny, the confidence she'd just found threatening to evaporate. But to her surprise, Jenny Williams stepped forward. "It wasn't nonsense," she said clearly. "It was harassment. And there's video." Mayor Thompson's expression darkened. "Video can be interpreted many ways. Contexts can be misunderstood. Teenage interactions are complicated." "Not this one," Frank countered. "It's pretty straightforward." A tense silence filled the room. Principal Reynolds broke it with practiced diplomacy. "Girls, thank you for your time. You're excused to return to class. We'll be in touch about next steps." As they left the office, Sophia and Jenny could hear the mayor's voice rising behind the closed door. They paused in the empty hallway, both processing what had just happened. "He's going to make this disappear," Jenny said flatly. "That's what happened at my old school when the coach's son was caught dealing pills. Money and power always win." Sophia thought of Frank Sullivan's determined expression, the video evidence, her own statement now on record. "Maybe not this time," she said, surprising herself with her resolve. "Maybe this time is different." She didn't know then how prophetic those words would be, or how dangerous. The next 48 hours unfolded with the surreal quality of a storm gathering force. Bradley Thompson and his two closest friends were called to the principal's office. Rumors spread through the school in frantic text messages and whispered conversations. Sophia found herself the subject of curious stares in the hallways, some sympathetic, others hostile. Frank Sullivan maintained his vigilant presence, appearing with uncanny timing whenever Sophia moved between classes. He never mentioned the case directly, but would nod reassuringly when their paths crossed. On Wednesday afternoon, Roberto Martinez received a call at work, requesting his presence at the school for an emergency meeting. He arrived still wearing his mechanic's uniform, grease stains on his hands, despite his efforts to scrub them clean in the shop's bathroom. The conference room adjacent to Principal Reynolds's office contained an unexpectedly large group. Barbara Reynolds sat at the head of the table, flanked by the school district's attorney, a nervous young man clutching a leather portfolio. Frank Sullivan stood by the window, arms crossed. Across from them sat Mayor Thompson and his wife Patricia Bradley, between them, along with a silver-haired man Roberto recognized as James Calloway, the most expensive lawyer in 3 counties. Most surprising was the presence of Officer Michael Davis in his Oak Ridge Police Department uniform. At 55, Davis was a 20-year veteran of the force and widely respected in the community. Roberto took the empty seat beside Sophia, squeezing her hand beneath the table. "What's going on?" he whispered. Before she could answer, Principal Reynolds called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We're here to address a serious disciplinary issue involving Bradley Thompson and allegations made by Sophia Martinez regarding an incident in the school cafeteria 2 days ago." James Calloway immediately raised a manicured hand. "Before we proceed, I'd like to note for the record that my client categorically denies any wrongdoing. Bradley is an exemplary student with no previous disciplinary issues. We view these allegations as a misunderstanding at best and potentially defamatory at worst." Frank Sullivan made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh. "Then you should watch the video." "Video can be misleading," Patricia Thompson interjected, her perfectly styled hair not moving as she shook her head. "Teenagers play around, it's normal." Roberto, still trying to understand what exactly his daughter had experienced, looked at Sophia with confusion. She stared at the table, unable to meet his eyes. "Perhaps we should all review the evidence," Officer Davis suggested, his tone neutral but authoritative. "Mr. Sullivan has provided me with the security footage in question." Principal Reynolds nodded reluctantly. "Yes, that seems appropriate." Frank moved to the computer station at the side of the room, inserting a flash drive. The wall-mounted screen flickered to life, showing the cafeteria from an overhead angle. He fast-forwarded to the moment Bradley approached Sophia's table, then slowed to normal speed. Roberto Martinez watched in growing horror as the scene unfolded. When Bradley circled behind his daughter and yanked her undergarment, Roberto's hands clenched into fists. The sound of laughter from the video, the sight of his daughter's humiliation, sent a surge of protective rage through him. "Turn it off!" he demanded, voice tight with controlled fury. "I've seen enough." The screen went black. Silence filled the room until Bradley spoke. "It was just a joke," he insisted, though his usual confidence had diminished considerably. "Everyone was laughing. It wasn't a big deal." "It wasn't a joke to my daughter," Roberto said, finally looking directly at the boy. "What you did was assault." Mayor Thompson bristled. "That's an outrageous characterization. Boys have been snapping bra straps since bras were invented. It's immature, certainly, but hardly criminal." Officer Davis cleared his throat. "Actually, under Michigan law, unwanted touching of an intimate nature can indeed constitute criminal sexual conduct in the 4th degree, especially in an educational setting." The mayor's face reddened. "You can't be serious, Michael. You're talking about charging my son with a crime for a schoolboy prank." "I'm explaining the legal definition," Davis replied evenly. "And yes, the prosecutor could pursue charges if Ms. Martinez wishes to file a formal complaint." All eyes turned to Sophia, who seemed to shrink under the sudden attention. Roberto placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "This isn't just about one incident," Frank interjected. "Jenny Williams has reported similar behavior from Bradley at a recent party." And there's Amber Collins from last month. Hearsay, Calloway dismissed with a wave. Unsubstantiated allegations with no evidence. Actually, Frank countered, I've been reviewing security footage from the past month. There's a pattern here. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Mayor Thompson's face. What exactly are you implying, Sullivan? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Your son has been harassing female students, and it's all on camera. The meeting deteriorated rapidly after that. Calloway demanded all footage be turned over to him immediately. Principal Reynolds tried unsuccessfully to steer the conversation back to school disciplinary procedures. Officer Davis maintained his professional detachment while making notes in a small notebook. Through it all, Bradley Thompson sat in sullen silence, occasionally exchanging glances with his parents. Roberto noticed the boy never once looked at Sophia, never offered an apology, or showed any sign of remorse. I think we've said enough for today, Mayor Thompson announced finally, standing to indicate the meeting was over by his decree. Bradley will take a voluntary 2-day absence while we sort this misunderstanding out. I'm sure we can reach a reasonable solution without further escalation. As the Thompson family and their attorney prepared to leave, Frank Sullivan spoke up. One more thing, Mayor. All evidence in this case has been properly secured and backed up in multiple locations, just so everyone's clear. The implied warning hung in the air. Mayor Thompson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he ushered his family out. When they were gone, Officer Davis approached Roberto and Sophia. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to speak with you and your father about your options for filing a formal complaint. This is entirely your decision, but you should understand the process. Roberto looked at his daughter, seeing both the fear and determination in her eyes. It's your choice, mija, he said softly. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Sophia took a deep breath. I want to file a complaint, she said. Not just for me, but for Jenny and Amber and anyone else he might hurt. As they left the conference room, Frank Sullivan fell into step beside them. You did good in there, he told Sophia. Standing up to people like the Thompsons takes real courage. Why are you helping us? Roberto asked directly. Most people in this town wouldn't cross the mayor. A shadow passed over Frank's weathered face. Let's just say I've seen what happens when bullies go unchecked. He hesitated, then added, My niece Catherine took her own life after being bullied. She was about Sophia's age. The school did nothing, even when her parents begged for help. Understanding dawned in Roberto's eyes. I'm sorry about your niece. Frank nodded, accepting the sympathy. This isn't just about one incident or one student. There's something wrong in this school has been for years. The Thompsons are just part of it. What do you mean? Sophia asked. Frank glanced around the empty hallway before answering. Patterns don't develop overnight. The way Bradley acted, the confidence that he wouldn't face consequences that comes from somewhere, and the way the administration responds, he shook his head. I've been watching for 3 years now. There's a system in place protecting certain kids, burying certain incidents. You sound like you're describing a conspiracy, Roberto said skeptically. Not a conspiracy, Frank corrected. A culture, one that's been carefully maintained for a long time. He checked his watch. I need to get back to my post, but be careful. The Thompsons won't take this lying down. As they walked to the parking lot, Roberto mulled over Frank's words. He'd lived in Oak Ridge for 20 years, but had always existed on its periphery, the Hispanic mechanic who kept to himself, raising his daughter alone. He'd noticed the town's power dynamics, of course, but had never had reason to challenge them directly. Until now. Dad! Sophia's voice pulled him from his thoughts as they reached his old pickup truck. Are we doing the right thing? Roberto looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not just the quiet, artistic girl he'd raised, but a young woman of principle and courage. In that moment, he felt a fierce pride that overshadowed his concerns about taking on the most powerful family in Oak Ridge. "Yes, mija," he said firmly. "We're doing exactly the right thing." He couldn't have known then how far beyond a simple case of school bullying this would reach, or the decades of buried secrets they were about to unearth. That evening, as Sophia worked on homework at the kitchen table, Roberto made a phone call to his father. Miguel Martinez had moved to Arizona 5 years earlier, seeking a warmer climate for his arthritis, but he still owned the small farm on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, where Roberto had grown up. "Papa, I need your advice." Roberto began explaining the situation in careful detail. Miguel listened without interruption. At 78, he had seen enough of life to know when trouble was brewing. "The Thompsons," he said, finally, his accent still strong despite 50 years in America. "They have never been friends to people like us." "This isn't about race, Papa," Roberto insisted, though a small voice in his mind wondered if that was entirely true. "Perhaps not," Miguel conceded, "but it is about power. And in Oak Ridge, the Thompsons have always had it." He paused. "There is something you should know, Hijo. Something that happened long ago when Richard Thompson was a young man." Roberto listened as his father recounted a story from 1977 when Miguel had been working as a maintenance man at Oak Ridge High. A freshman girl had accused Richard Thompson, then a senior and star athlete like his son, of similar harassment. The girl's family had suddenly moved away. The incident had been buried. "History repeats," Miguel concluded heavily. "But perhaps this time, with the video evidence your friend has found, things will be different." After hanging up, Roberto sat at the kitchen table watching Sophia as she concentrated on her calculus problems. The thought that she was facing the same kind of harassment that had gone unpunished decades earlier filled him with renewed determination. Whatever it took, whatever they faced, he would ensure that this time the story ended differently. Frank Sullivan didn't go home after his shift ended. Instead, he drove to the edge of town where Oak Ridge gave way to farmland and scattered woods. The Silver Dollar filling station had been a landmark since the 1950s, though it had stopped selling gas years ago. Now it served as a combination convenience store bait shop and unofficial gathering place for the town's older residents. The bell above the door jangled as Frank entered. George Wilson looked up from behind the counter, his perpetual scowl softening slightly at the sight of his old friend. At 70, with a prosthetic leg from Vietnam and a lifetime of hard work etched into his face, George had become something of a local institution himself. "Wasn't expecting you tonight," he remarked, closing the fishing magazine he'd been reading. "Coffee's fresh for once." Frank poured himself a cup and settled onto one of the mismatched stools at the counter. The store was empty, except for them, most of the regular evening crowd already home for dinner. "Got a situation at the school," Frank said after taking a sip. "Thought you might have some perspective." George listened as Frank outlined the events of the past few days, his expression growing increasingly grim. When Frank mentioned the Thompsons, George's hand moved unconsciously to rub his prosthetic leg, where it met his thigh, a habit when he was troubled. "Richard Thompson," he muttered. "Why am I not surprised his kid turned out to be a bully?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "You know something I don't." George glanced toward the window as if checking they were truly alone, then reached beneath the counter. He emerged with a dusty yearbook from 1977. "Kept this all these years. Reminder of what people are capable of." He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for, a photograph of the football team. A young Richard Thompson stood in the center, his arm draped possessively around a cheerleader's shoulders. Thompson and his friends had a name for themselves back then, George said quietly. The Untouchables. Because nothing they did ever touched them, no consequences, no punishment. They ran that school like their personal kingdom, and God help anyone who crossed them. He turned another page, pointing to a school newspaper clipping pasted inside. The headline read, "Senior Prank Goes Wrong. Freshman Hospitalized." This wasn't no prank, George continued, his grammar slipping as old anger resurfaced. They locked Luis Vasquez in a supply closet overnight. Boy was severely asthmatic. Nearly died before the janitor found him next morning. Frank studied the article with growing disquiet. What happened to the boys responsible? George's laugh held no humor. 3-day suspension, community service. Meanwhile, Luis's family suddenly found themselves unwelcome in Oak Ridge. His father lost his job at the mill. They were gone within a month. Jesus, Frank muttered. And Thompson was involved. Ringleader, George confirmed. But his daddy was on the school board. His uncle was mayor. Matter got handled internally. He closed the yearbook with a thump. Been the way of things in this town for generations. Certain families get away with whatever they damn well please. Frank thought of the video footage, the clear evidence against Bradley Thompson. Maybe not this time. George studied his friend's face. You really think a security tape is going to change 50 years of how this town operates? The Thompsons own half the businesses in Oak Ridge. Mayor controls the police budget, the zoning board, everything that matters. Not everything, Frank countered. They don't control me, or Roberto Martinez, or his daughter, who's brave enough to stand up despite everything. George considered this, then nodded slowly. No, I suppose they don't. He reached for the coffee pot, refilling both their cups. So what's your next move? I'm not entirely sure, Frank admitted. But I think there's more to this than one incident. The way Principal Reynolds reacted, the immediate involvement of lawyers, it feels practiced like a system kicking into gear. Wouldn't surprise me, George said. Thompson's boy probably been getting away with worse for years, like father, like son. Frank's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He checked it, frowning at the message from an unknown number. Need to talk. School library. 7:30 tomorrow morning. About the Thompson case. Come alone. Problem? George asked, noting his expression. Frank showed him the message. Could be nothing. Could be a setup. George considered it. Or could be someone with information. Someone afraid to come forward publicly. Only one way to find out, Frank said, pocketing his phone. I'll be there. Be careful, George warned. You're poking a hornet's nest. These people have had decades to perfect keeping their secrets. Frank nodded, thinking of his niece Catherine, of Sophia Martinez's quiet courage, of decades of buried incidents and silenced victims. Some secrets need to see daylight, he said firmly, no matter how long they've been buried. As he drove home through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something much larger and darker than a single case of bullying. The pieces were still scattered, the connections unclear, but his detective's instinct told him they were all part of the same puzzle, a puzzle whose solution might shake Oak Ridge to its foundations. The school library stood silent and dim in the early morning light. Frank arrived at 7:15, using his security access card to enter the building before regular hours. He moved cautiously through the empty corridors, his footsteps echoing on the polished floors. The library doors were unlocked, unusual for this hour. Frank paused, listening. No sound came from within. He pushed one door open slowly, scanning the large room with practiced eyes. "Hello? Anyone here?" A figure emerged from between the stacks. Not a student as he'd expected, but Eleanor Davis, the school's longest-serving teacher. At 70, with steel-gray hair cut in a practical bob and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, Mrs. Davis had taught history at Oak Ridge High for nearly 45 years. She was a local institution respected even by the most troublesome students. "Mr. Sullivan," she greeted him formally. "Thank you for coming." Frank relaxed slightly but remained alert. "You sent the text," she nodded, gesturing toward a table in the far corner partially hidden by the reference section. "I thought it best we speak privately." As they settled at the table, Frank studied her face. Eleanor Davis had always struck him as different from other longtime Oak Ridge residents, less deferential to the town's power structures, more concerned with principles than politics. "I'm retiring at the end of this semester," she began without preamble. "After 45 years, I'm finally leaving Oak Ridge High." Frank waited, sensing there was more to this meeting than retirement announcements. "I've watched 3 generations of students pass through these halls," she continued, her voice lowering despite the empty room. "3 generations of Thompsons, Callways, Reynoldses, 3 generations of the same patterns repeating." "What patterns?" Frank asked, though he suspected he already knew. Eleanor's eyes, sharp behind her glasses, met his directly. "Abuse of power, harassment, bullying, and most importantly, the systematic protection of certain students from the consequences of their actions." She reached into her worn leather briefcase and removed a small leather-bound book. "I've kept this diary since my first year teaching here. Names, dates, incidents. The ones that were buried, the ones that disappeared from official records." Frank stared at the journal, understanding its significance immediately. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because of Sophia Martinez," Eleanor answered simply. "Because for the first time in decades, there's actual evidence that can't be easily dismissed or buried. Because I'm tired, Mr. Sullivan. Tired of watching history repeat itself while I stand by silently." She opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "Richard Thompson, 1977. Luis Vasquez wasn't his only victim. There were others, girls mainly. One attempted suicide. Her family was paid for their silence. The school records of the incident were altered, then lost, in a convenient basement flood." Frank's mind raced as he processed this information. "And his son, Bradley." Eleanor turned several pages forward. "Like father, like son. The first incident I recorded was in his freshman year. A girl named Melissa Chen. Her family moved to California afterward. Then Emily Watson junior year transferred to private school suddenly. The pattern is consistent." "Why didn't you come forward before?" Frank asked, careful to keep accusation from his tone. Eleanor's face showed a complex mix of shame and defiance. "I tried in the beginning, was nearly fired for my efforts. Later," she sighed heavily, "later I told myself I could do more good staying in position watching documenting. Small resistances where possible." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "Rationalizations of a coward, perhaps. Or survival mechanisms in a system designed to silence dissent," Frank suggested gently. She closed the journal, pushing it toward him. "Take it. Use it. I should have done this years ago." Frank hesitated. "Are you sure this could have serious repercussions for you, even with retirement approaching?" "I'm 70 years old, Mr. Sullivan. I've taught over 4,000 students in my career. What kind of final lesson am I teaching if I remain silent now?" Her voice strengthened with resolve. "Besides, my brother is the police chief. Even the Thompsons have limits to their influence. Frank carefully placed the journal in his inside jacket pocket. Thank you. This could make a significant difference. Eleanor stood signaling the end of their clandestine meeting. There's something else you should know. Something few people remember anymore. She glanced toward the library's main desk. This building has secrets, Mr. Sullivan, literal ones. During the Cold War renovations in the 1950s, they built a fallout shelter beneath the library. Later in the 1970s, it was converted to sealed storage for sensitive school records. Frank frowned. I've never seen any access point to a lower level. The entrance was concealed during renovations in the 1990s. Behind the third bookcase in the northwest corner, there's a maintenance panel. Behind that panel is the original door. She handed him a small brass key. This opens it. The official story is that all records were digitized and the old storage area abandoned. But I have reason to believe that's not entirely true. You think there are still records down there? The ones they didn't want digitized, Eleanor confirmed. The ones too sensitive to destroy, but too dangerous to keep in accessible archives. The implications hung between them. Before Frank could respond, they heard the distant sound of the main entrance doors opening, the first staff arriving for the day. I should go, Eleanor said quickly. Be careful, Mr. Sullivan, and watch over Sophia Martinez. What she's doing takes extraordinary courage in this town. As she hurried away, Frank remained seated, processing everything he'd learned. The journal in his pocket felt heavy with its burden of secrets. The key seemed to burn against his palm with possibility. The simple case of bullying was expanding into something much larger and darker. A generational pattern of abuse and cover-ups. A system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. And somewhere beneath his feet, sealed away in darkness, might lie the documentation that could expose it all. Frank pocketed the key and stood. The school day was beginning. Students would soon fill these halls, most unaware of the currents of power and history flowing beneath the surface of their daily lives. Among them would be Sophia Martinez, who had unwittingly challenged not just one bully, but an entire entrenched system. He needed to ensure she remained safe while he pursued this new lead. Because if there was one thing Frank Sullivan had learned in his long career, it was that powerful people with secrets would go to extraordinary lengths to keep those secrets buried. And in Oak Ridge, those secrets had been accumulating for generations. The fallout from Sophia's complaint spread through Oak Ridge like ripples in still water. By Thursday morning, the school hummed with whispered conversations that fell silent when she passed. Some students avoided her entirely, as if her courage might be contagious. Others offered quiet nods of solidarity. A few, mostly friends of Bradley Thompson, shot her venomous glares in the hallways. Jenny Williams had become her unexpected ally, appearing at Sophia's side between classes, sharing lunch at their corner table. Safety in numbers, she'd explained with a grim smile. Jenny had transferred to Oak Ridge just a month earlier, when her mother took a nursing position at the local hospital. As the newest outsider, she had quickly learned Oak Ridge High's unwritten hierarchies. At my old school, Jenny confided, as they walked to third-period chemistry, we had cliques too, but nothing like this. Here, it's like some medieval kingdom with the Thompsons as royalty. Sophia nodded, uncomfortably aware of the stares following them. It's always been this way. Most people just accept it. Well, not anymore, Jenny said firmly. Not after what you did. What Sophia had done, standing up to Bradley Thompson, filing an official complaint, felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. For years, she had navigated high school by making herself invisible. Now she stood at the center of a brewing storm. Bradley and his two closest friends had received 3-day suspensions, a punishment that had shocked the student body with its unprecedented severity against members of the social elite. Mayor Thompson had issued a public statement expressing disappointment in the school's rush to judgment without proper investigation, and hinting at possible legal action. Principal Reynolds had called an emergency assembly on respect and appropriate behavior, carefully avoiding any direct reference to the incident, while emphasizing the school's zero-tolerance policy for harassment. The subtext was clear to everyone: something had shifted in Oak Ridge High's carefully maintained power structure. As Sophia and Jenny pushed through the double doors toward the science wing, a group of senior girls huddled near the water fountain fell silent, watching them pass. "Ignore them," Jenny whispered. But Sophia had caught the words attention-seeking and overreaction before the girls noticed her approach. The familiar burn of shame threatened to rise, but she pushed it down, remembering her father's words from the night before. "Stand tall, mija. You did nothing wrong." The girls had nearly reached their classroom when Amber Collins stepped into their path. As head cheerleader and Bradley's sometimes girlfriend Amber typically orbited the center of Oak Ridge High's social universe, rarely acknowledging those on its periphery. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Privately?" Jenny glanced at Sophia, questioning. Sophia nodded. "Go ahead. I'll catch up." When they were alone in the empty corridor, Amber shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to say, what you did was brave." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Bradley did the same thing to me. Several times. I never said anything because—" She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Dating Bradley Thompson came with certain unspoken requirements, including silence about his behavior. "You could report it too," Sophia suggested carefully. "Officer Davis is taking statements." Amber shook her head quickly. "I can't. My dad works for the mayor. Our family can't afford to make enemies of the Thompsons." Her eyes, rimmed with perfectly applied eyeliner, held a mixture of shame and resignation. "But I wanted you to know, not everyone thinks you're wrong. Some of us just can't afford to say it publicly." Before Sophia could respond, Amber turned and hurried away, her cheerleading uniform a bright flash of school colors against the institutional beige walls. Sophia stood for a moment, processing this unexpected encounter. How many others, she wondered, had silently endured similar treatment? How many had been forced to weigh their dignity against the practical realities of crossing Oak Ridge's most powerful family? The thought followed her through the day, a counterpoint to the hostile stares and whispered comments. By the time the final bell rang, she felt drained, as if the simple act of moving through the school had required every ounce of her energy. She was gathering books from her locker when Frank Sullivan appeared beside her, his presence drawing curious glances from passing students. "Got a minute?" he asked quietly. Sophia nodded, closing her locker. "Is something wrong?" "Not here," Frank said, gesturing toward the now empty administrative wing. "Let's find somewhere private." They ended up in the small conference room where just days earlier the Thompsons and their lawyer had sat in judgment. Frank closed the door, checking that the windows to the main office were covered before speaking. "How are you holding up?" he asked, genuine concern in his weathered face. Sophia managed a small shrug. "Okay, I guess. People are talking, but I expected that." "Anyone giving you trouble threats? No direct threats, just looks, whispers." She paused. "Amber Collins talked to me today. Said Bradley did the same thing to her, but she's afraid to come forward." Frank nodded grimly. "I'm not surprised. The Thompsons cast a long shadow in this town." He seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. "Sophia, I think what's happening goes beyond Bradley. There's a pattern here, one that's been in place for decades." He explained his meeting with Eleanor Davis, the journal documenting years of similar incidents, the suggestion of sealed records hidden beneath the library. As he spoke, Sophia felt a cold realization spreading through her. What had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident, but part of something larger and more systematic. "So this has been happening for years?" she asked when he finished. "And everyone just let it happen?" "Not everyone," Frank corrected. "Mrs. Davis documented it. Probably others tried to stop it too. But systems like this protect themselves. People who speak up get pushed out or silenced." "Like what's happening to me now," Sophia said quietly. Frank nodded. "Which is why I wanted to warn you. Be careful. Stay alert. The Thompsons aren't used to being challenged, especially not publicly. What are you going to do about the hidden records, if they really exist?" "I'm going to look," Frank said simply. "Tonight, after hours. But I need to be careful. If there's something down there that could damage the Thompsons, revealing it could make things worse for you in the short term." Sophia considered this. "My dad's working late tonight. I was planning to stay at the library anyway. I could help you look." Frank's refusal was immediate. "Absolutely not. This isn't your responsibility, and I won't put you at risk." "It became my responsibility when Bradley grabbed me," Sophia countered with unexpected firmness. "Besides, I know the library better than anyone. I spend hours there every week." The security officer studied her face, recognizing the same quiet determination he'd seen when she decided to file the complaint. "Your father would kill me," he muttered, but his resolve was weakening. "I'll tell him I'm staying late to study. It's not even a lie." Sophia leaned forward. "Please, Mr. Sullivan, I need to know what we're really dealing with." After a long moment, Frank nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we do this carefully. Meet me at the library at 7:30. The evening custodian finishes the East Wing by 7:15 and doesn't circle back until final rounds at 9:00. As Sophia left the conference room, a new sense of purpose had replaced her earlier exhaustion. She was no longer simply reacting to events, but actively pursuing answers. The transformation surprised her. The quiet girl who had spent years avoiding attention was now willingly stepping further into a confrontation with the town's most powerful family. She wondered briefly if her mother would recognize her now. Roberto Martinez wiped grease from his hands as he finished the transmission replacement on Dave Johnson's ancient Ford. The repair shop where he worked sat at the edge of the industrial district, a corrugated metal building with a gravel parking lot and a faded sign. It wasn't glamorous work, but Roberto took pride in doing it well. He had built a reputation for honest pricing and meticulous repairs that kept customers returning despite the shop's humble appearance. "Looking good, Martinez," called his boss Larry Peterson, emerging from the small office with an invoice. At 62, Larry had owned Peterson Auto Repair for 30 years, taking over from his father, who had founded it in 1954. His hands bore the permanent stains and calluses of a lifetime working with engines. "Just finishing up," Roberto replied, closing the hood. "Should be good for another 100,000 miles, if he maintains it." Larry nodded approvingly. "Always thorough. That's why I keep you around." He hesitated, then added with careful casualness, "Heard about what happened at the school, with your girl." Roberto stiffened slightly. News traveled fast in Oak Ridge. "She's filing a complaint. The Thompson boy put his hands on her." Larry gave a low whistle. "Taking on the Thompsons? That's bold." "It's necessary," Roberto corrected, wiping his tools before returning them to their proper places. "What that boy did wasn't right." "Not saying it was." Larry raised his hands defensively. "Just saying the Thompsons have long memories and longer reach in this town." Roberto turned to face his boss directly. "You worried about trouble for the shop." Larry sighed, the sound of a man who had navigated Oak Ridge's complicated politics for decades. Won't lie to you. Mayor Thompson's brother-in-law sits on the zoning board. His cousin handles business licenses for the county. They've got ways of making life difficult. So you want me to back down, tell Sophia to drop the complaint? Roberto's voice held a dangerous edge. No, no. Larry shook his head quickly. That's not what I'm saying. Your girl did right. The Thompson kid's been a menace for years. He lowered his voice despite the empty shop. My niece went to school with him. Had to switch classes junior year because of how he acted. Principal did nothing. Roberto's anger subsided slightly. Then, what are you saying, Larry? The older man scratched his stubbled chin thoughtfully. Just be prepared. The Thompsons fight dirty when cornered. And watch out for Barbara Reynolds. She talks a good game about student safety, but she's been in Richard Thompson's pocket for years. We've got video evidence, Roberto pointed out, and Officer Davis seems to be taking it seriously. Michael's one of the good ones, Larry agreed. Old-school cop, cares more about right and wrong than politics, but even he has limits to what he can do against the mayor. He clapped Roberto on the shoulder. All I'm saying is, be careful. And if you need anything time off for court appearances, whatever, you've got it. Just give me notice. Roberto nodded, grateful for the support, however cautiously offered. Thanks, Larry. Might need to take you up on that. As he finished cleaning up his workspace, Roberto's phone vibrated with a text from Sophia. Staying late at library to study. Home by 9:30. Love you. He texted back a quick acknowledgement, then paused, thumb hovering over the screen. He wanted to ask if she was okay, if anyone had given her trouble today, if she was having second thoughts about the complaint. But he knew his daughter knew her quiet strength and determination. She wouldn't have made this decision lightly, and she wouldn't appreciate him questioning it now. Instead, he simply added, "Proud of you, Mija. Be safe." As the evening shadows lengthened across Oak Ridge, another meeting was taking place in the wood-paneled study of the Thompson residence. Richard Thompson paced before the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand, while James Calloway sat in a leather armchair, reviewing documents spread across an antique coffee table. This should have been handled at the school level, the mayor fumed. A simple detention, maybe a half-hearted apology. Instead, we've got police involvement and talk of criminal charges. The video complicates things, Calloway admitted, removing his reading glasses. Without it, we could dismiss the girl's claims as exaggeration or misunderstanding. But with visual evidence, evidence of what boys being boys, a moment of horseplay, Thompson drained his scotch and immediately poured another. When I was in school, this kind of thing happened daily. No one called the police. Patricia Thompson entered silently, her Pilates-toned figure immaculate in designer loungewear despite the late hour. Richard, lower your voice. Bradley's upstairs. The mayor glanced toward the ceiling, then continued more quietly. Where did we go wrong with that boy? I've given him everything. Best schools, best opportunities, my name and reputation, and he repays me by getting caught on camera, assaulting some nobody's daughter. The Martinez girl is hardly a nobody, Patricia corrected coolly. She's top of her class. Early acceptance to Michigan State's art program. Her father may be just a mechanic, but they're not the typical rabble-rousers. Thompson waved this away impatiently. The point is, this should never have escalated. Barbara Reynolds assured me she had the situation under control. The security officer is the problem, Calloway interjected. This Sullivan character. He went directly to Officer Davis with the footage before Reynolds could contain it. Sullivan, Thompson spat the name like a curse. Vietnam vet with a hero complex. Thinks he's still a detective instead of a glorified hall monitor. He turned to his wife. To his Can we get him fired? Patricia considered this. Possibly. He's past retirement age working on a year-to-year contract. But firing him now in the middle of this situation would look retaliatory. And would likely backfire, Calloway added. Better to undermine his credibility. Question his motives. Suggest he has some personal vendetta against Bradley. Thompson nodded, the familiar strategies of damage control falling into place. What about the Martinez family? Any leverage there? Roberto Martinez has worked at Peterson's Auto for 15 years. Clean record, pays taxes on time, no DUIs or domestic calls. Patricia's tone suggested she'd already investigated thoroughly. The mother left when the girl was young. Lives in California now. No contact. The mechanic, Thompson mused. Peterson's shop is on that strip we've been eyeing for the new development. Zoning change comes up next month. Calloway raised an eyebrow. Careful, Richard. Anything that looks like direct retaliation could escalate this further. I'm not talking about retaliation, Thompson countered smoothly. Just exploring all aspects of ongoing city business. He took another sip of scotch. What's our next move with the legal situation? I've filed a motion to seal all records related to the case, citing Bradley's status as a minor, Calloway reported. Also requested all security footage be turned over to us for independent analysis. That should buy us time. And Officer Davis, professional but uncommitted. He's following procedure, but I don't sense any personal investment in pursuing this aggressively. Calloway gathered his papers into a neat stack. The girl is our biggest unknown. If she loses her nerve or can be persuaded to accept a private settlement, I'll handle the girl, Patricia interjected with quiet authority. Leave that to me. Richard Thompson studied his wife's composed features, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. In 23 years of marriage, Patricia had often proven the more strategic of the pair, particularly in delicate situations requiring a subtle touch. Just fix this, he said finally. Bradley has Princeton interviews next month. This needs to be behind us by then. None of them noticed the shadow that briefly passed by the study door, Bradley pausing to listen before continuing upstairs, his expression unreadable in the dimly lit hallway. The school library stood silent and shadowed as Sophia slipped through the side entrance at precisely 7:30. Frank Sullivan waited inside his security uniform, exchanged for jeans and a dark sweater that helped him blend into the dimness. "Anyone see you come in?" he asked quietly. Sophia shook her head. "No, the parking lot's empty, except for Mr. Diaz's car in the maintenance bay." Frank nodded, satisfied. "We have about 90 minutes before he makes his final rounds. That should be enough time." He led the way through the reference section toward the northwest corner of the library. Ancient encyclopedias lined the shelves here, rarely touched in the digital age, but maintained out of tradition or inertia. Frank counted down the bookcases, stopping at the third. "Mrs. Davis said, 'There's a maintenance panel behind this bookcase,'" he murmured, examining the heavy wooden structure. "Help me look." Together, they ran their hands along the edges of the shelves, searching for any mechanism that might reveal a hidden panel. It was Sophia who found a small metal plate, disguised as part of the shelf support. When pressed, it released a click, and the entire bookcase swung outward slightly. "Good eye," Frank said approvingly. Behind the bookcase, a standard maintenance panel covered the wall. Frank removed it easily, revealing an older, more substantial door behind steel with a simple keyhole. He produced Eleanor Davis's brass key, which fit perfectly. The lock turned with surprising smoothness, suggesting it had been used more recently than the concealed entrance might indicate. The door opened onto a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. Frank switched on the heavy-duty flashlight he had brought, revealing concrete steps disappearing downward. "I'll go first," he said. "Stay close." The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying the distinct smell of old paper and the faint mustiness of enclosed space. At the bottom, another door awaited them, this one unlocked. Frank pushed it open carefully, sweeping his flashlight across what lay beyond. The beam illuminated what had once been a Cold War-era fallout shelter, since converted to an archive room. Metal shelving units filled the space lined with cardboard boxes, filing cabinets, and stacks of ledgers. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. Frank pulled a chain and weak yellow light spread through the room. "My God," he breathed. "It's all here." Sophia moved to the nearest shelf, examining the boxes. Each was labeled with a year and a category: disciplinary actions, special cases, board meetings confidential, Title IX investigations. "There's so much," she said, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of records. "Where do we even start?" Frank considered the question. "Let's be strategic. First, let's look for anything from 1977, the year Richard Thompson graduated. Mrs. Davis specifically mentioned incidents from that time." They worked methodically, Frank taking one side of the room, Sophia the other. The organization system wasn't immediately obvious, mixing chronological and thematic arrangements in a way that suggested multiple people had contributed to the archive over decades. "Found something," Sophia called after several minutes. She carefully lifted a thick folder labeled Special Handling 1977. Inside were dozens of incident reports, letters from parents, and internal memos. Frank joined her as she spread the contents across a small table in the center of the room. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents: Richard Thompson. "Look at this," Frank said, holding up a formal complaint form. "Luis Vasquez, freshman, locked in supply closet overnight by senior students, hospitalized for severe asthma attack." He flipped to the next page. "Investigation findings inconclusive. Recommended action none. Reason insufficient evidence." "But here's a witness statement," Sophia pointed out, finding a related document. "Janitor found Luis. Says he heard Richard Thompson and two other seniors laughing about it the next day." They continued through the file, uncovering more incidents attributed to Richard Thompson and his friends: property destruction, harassment of female students, intimidation of teachers who gave them poor grades. In each case, the official findings were inconclusive, or the recommended actions mysteriously reduced or dismissed entirely. "This is exactly what George Wilson told me about," Frank muttered. "The untouchables, Thompson and his friends, acting with complete impunity." A separate envelope caught Sophia's attention. Unlike the other documents, this one was sealed with red tape marked "Confidential Board Eyes Only." She carefully opened it, revealing a stack of papers inside. "It's about a girl named Sarah Kinley," she said, scanning the top document. "Oh," her voice faltered. Frank gently took the papers. "Attempted suicide December 1977, junior year." He continued reading, his expression darkening. "She left a note specifically naming Richard Thompson, claiming he had sexually harassed her repeatedly, and that no one would help when she reported it." The subsequent documents detailed a hushed financial settlement between the school board and the Kinley family, which included a non-disclosure agreement and the family's relocation expenses to another state. The final memo, signed by the superintendent, ordered all records of Sarah Kinley's complaints expunged from official school files. "They buried it," Sophia whispered. "They paid her family to go away and erased what happened." "And it wasn't just Thompson," Frank added grimly, finding more files. "The same pattern repeats with other prominent families in Oak Ridge: the Callaways, the Reynoldses." "Principal Reynolds's family?" Sophia asked, surprised. Frank nodded. Barbara's husband, William, was 2 years ahead of Richard Thompson. Same social circle. He pulled out another file. Here, William Reynolds' disciplinary review for inappropriate behavior toward female students. Recommendation for 2-week suspension reduced to detention by board intervention. They worked in silence for several minutes, the weight of what they were discovering settling around them. Generations of abuse, harassment, and bullying, all systematically covered up to protect the children of Oak Ridge's elite families. It's not just the past, Sophia said, suddenly moving to a more recent section. Look at these. She pointed to files from the last decade, many bearing the name Thompson, again, this time Bradley. Frank joined her, examining the newer records. Middle school incidents, 9th grade, 10th grade, all handled internally. No official disciplinary record. He looked up at Sophia. Your incident isn't the first, not by a long shot. But it might be the first with video evidence that can't be buried down here. Sophia realized. A noise from above made them both freeze, the distant sound of a door opening somewhere in the library. Someone's up there, Frank whispered, immediately switching off the overhead light. We need to go. Now. Wait, Sophia urged, grabbing several key files. We need to take these. Proof. Frank hesitated only briefly before nodding. Just the most important ones. Quickly. They worked by flashlight, selecting the most damning documents, the Sarah Kinley case, several of Richard Thompson's worst incidents, and a sampling of Bradley's buried disciplinary history. Frank slipped these into his backpack while Sophia carefully restored the remaining files to their original positions. The sounds above grew louder, footsteps moving purposefully through the library. That's not Diaz, Frank muttered. He always starts at the far end for final rounds. Someone else is here. They extinguished the flashlight and crept up the stairs in darkness, Frank leading the way. At the top, he eased the steel door open just enough to peer through the gap. The maintenance panel and bookcase had been closed, sealing them in. Someone shut us in, he whispered. We'll have to risk opening it. Before he could, voices became audible from the main library, Principal Reynolds, and someone else, a male voice too low to identify clearly. Told you it was accessed recently, the man was saying. The system logs every key card entry. Sullivan was here this morning with someone else. And you're certain the entrance hasn't been compromised? Reynolds asked. Positive. I checked it myself this afternoon. Whatever Sullivan's looking for, he hasn't found the archive yet. Frank and Sophia exchanged alarmed glances in the darkness. Whoever was speaking didn't know they were currently inside the very archive being discussed, which meant the entrance hadn't been checked as recently as claimed. We need to maintain deniability, Reynolds continued. If those records ever came to light, they won't, the man assured her. After the Martinez situation is resolved, we'll move everything to the secure facility at the lake house. Should have done it years ago. The voices began to fade as the speakers moved toward the library exit. Frank waited until the sound of the main doors closing echoed through the building, then counted to 100 before attempting to open their concealed entrance. The panel swung outward silently, revealing an empty library. Frank helped Sophia through, then carefully closed everything behind them, ensuring the bookcase looked undisturbed. That was too close, he muttered. We need to get out of here. They moved cautiously through the darkened library, using only the ambient light from exit signs to navigate. At the side entrance, Frank peered out to check the parking lot. Clear, he reported. But we should split up. I'll go first. Wait 5 minutes, then leave through the front. Anyone asks you, we're studying and lost track of time. Sophia nodded the stolen files in Frank's backpack, feeling like a physical weight between them, documentary evidence of decades of corruption and cover-ups. What do we do with what we found? She asked. Frank's weathered face was grim in the dim light. We take it to someone who can use it properly. Someone outside the Oak Ridge power structure. He checked his watch. I have a contact at the State Attorney General's office, former colleague from my detective days. I'll call him tomorrow. Will it be enough to stop the Thompsons? Frank considered the question seriously. It's a start, but we need to be careful. What we just did breaking into sealed records wasn't exactly legal, even if the records themselves reveal wrongdoing. Sophia hadn't considered this aspect. We could get in trouble. Let me worry about that part, Frank assured her. You've taken enough risk already. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Get home safely. Don't tell anyone what we found tonight, not even your father, not yet. The fewer people who know, the safer everyone is. As Sophia watched him disappear into the darkness of the parking lot backpack of damning evidence secure over his shoulder, she felt both exhilarated and terrified by what they had uncovered. The simple act of standing up to one bully had led them to expose generations of systematic abuse and corruption. The quiet girl who had spent years avoiding attention had just helped uncover Oak Ridge's darkest secrets, and she knew with absolute certainty that the Thompsons would do anything to keep those secrets buried. The following morning, Roberto Martinez was just opening the repair shop when Officer Michael Davis pulled into the gravel parking lot in an unmarked police vehicle. The early hour and unofficial car suggested this wasn't a routine visit. Officer Davis, Roberto greeted him, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Something wrong. Davis cut an imposing figure even in plain clothes, 6'2", with the solid build of a former college football player now maintained through disciplined exercise. At 55, his close-cropped hair had gone completely gray, but his movements retained the deliberate precision of his 30 years in law enforcement. Just following up on your daughter's case, he said, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Mind if we talk inside? In the small office, Davis declined coffee, but accepted the offered chair. His expression was professionally neutral, but Roberto detected concern beneath the practiced calm. I wanted to let you know where things stand, Davis began. The prosecutor is reviewing the evidence. Based on the video and Sophia's statement, there's a strong case for criminal sexual conduct in the 4th degree, a misdemeanor carrying up to 2 years probation. Roberto nodded. And there's significant pressure to reduce the charge or handle it through juvenile diversion. Davis's mouth tightened slightly. Mayor Thompson has been in constant contact with the prosecutor's office. So Bradley gets a slap on the wrist. Roberto couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Not necessarily, Davis countered. The video evidence is compelling, and your daughter's testimony was very credible. He leaned forward. But that's not the only reason I'm here. Roberto waited, sensing something more serious underlying this early morning visit. Frank Sullivan contacted me last night. Davis continued, lowering his voice despite the empty building. He and Sophia found something in the school old records documenting a pattern of similar incidents going back decades, many involving the Thompson family. Roberto stiffened. Sophia was involved in this. She told me she was studying at the library. She was at the library, Davis confirmed, just doing more than studying. Seeing Roberto's expression, he added quickly, she's not in any trouble, but what they found could be important evidence of a systematic cover-up of harassment and bullying by certain privileged students over generations. And you believe Frank's claims? Roberto asked carefully. Davis nodded. My sister Eleanor, Mrs. Davis, from the history department, has been documenting similar patterns for years, and I've had my own suspicions about how certain cases mysteriously disappear when they involve the town's prominent families. He produced a small notebook from his jacket pocket. The real reason I'm here is to warn you. If what Frank found becomes public, the Thompsons will fight back hard. They've controlled this town for generations, and they won't surrender that control easily. We're already committed, Roberto pointed out. Sophia filed her complaint. We can't back down now. I'm not suggesting you should, Davis assured him. Just be prepared. Watch for unusual activity around your home. Report any threats immediately to me directly, not the station. And maybe consider sending Sophia to stay with relatives until this blows over. Roberto shook his head firmly. We don't run. My father taught me that. If we start hiding now, what lesson does that teach Sophia? Davis studied him thoughtfully, then nodded with what might have been approval. Fair enough, but take precautions. Vary your routines. Be aware of your surroundings. He stood to leave, then hesitated. One more thing. Frank mentioned an old farm property your family owns outside town. My father's place, Roberto confirmed. He moved to Arizona a few years back, but we still own the land. Why, might be good to have a fallback location somewhere, not in your name or your current address. Davis reached for the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Martinez, your daughter did the right thing. Not many people in this town have had the courage to stand up to the Thompsons. After Davis left, Roberto sat alone in the quiet office processing everything he'd learned. His daughter, his quiet artistic daughter, who had always avoided conflict, had not only stood up to Bradley Thompson, but had apparently helped uncover decades of corruption. Pride mingled with fear as he contemplated what might come next. The Thompsons wouldn't relinquish power easily, and Oak Ridge was essentially their fiefdom. Every institution from the school board to the police department to the local newspaper operated under their direct or indirect influence. For the first time, Roberto seriously considered Davis's suggestion about sending Sophia away until the situation resolved. But he knew his daughter knew the quiet determination that ran beneath her shy exterior. She wouldn't agree to leave, not when she had committed to seeing this through. Instead, he reached for his phone and dialed his father's number in Arizona. If they were taking on Oak Ridge's most powerful family, they would need all the support and wisdom they could get, especially from someone who had witnessed the Thompson family's influence firsthand for decades. Across town in the immaculate kitchen of the Thompson residence, Patricia Thompson was preparing a different kind of strategy. Dressed in a casually expensive ensemble that projected approachable affluence, she reviewed her notes one final time before gathering her purse and car keys. "Where are you going?" Bradley asked, appearing in the doorway in basketball shorts and a rumpled t-shirt. His 3-day suspension had left him bored and restless, confined to the house by his father's decree. "I have some errands to run," Patricia replied vaguely. "Your father wants you to review those Princeton application essays while I'm gone." Bradley leaned against the doorframe, studying his mother with unexpected intensity. "You're going to try to buy them off, aren't you? The Martinez family?" Patricia's carefully composed expression faltered slightly. "That's a crude way of putting it, but accurate." Bradley's tone held an edge she wasn't accustomed to hearing from her son. "You're going to offer them money to drop the complaint. Make it all go away like always." "We're exploring all options to resolve this unfortunate situation," Patricia said carefully. "Your future is at stake, Bradley. Princeton Law School eventually taking your father's place. All of it depends on putting this behind us quickly." Bradley was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "What if I told you I did it?" he finally asked. "What if I admitted I grabbed her strap on purpose, that I wanted to humiliate her in front of everyone?" Patricia set her purse down slowly. "We don't need to have this conversation now." "We've never had this conversation," Bradley countered. "Not about this, not about Amber, not about any of it. You and Dad just fix things, make problems disappear. Because we love you," Patricia said, an unusual desperation entering her voice. Because we want to protect you. Protect me from what consequences responsibility. Bradley pushed away from the doorframe, standing straighter. What happens when I'm at Princeton and do something they won't cover up, or in law school, or when I'm 40, and haven't learned where the lines are because you and Dad erased them all? Patricia stared at her son truly, seeing him perhaps for the first time in years. Not the collection of achievements and potential they had cultivated, but the young man he had actually become, confused, entitled, and increasingly aware of his own moral bankruptcy. "When did you get so philosophical?" she asked, attempting to regain her footing in the conversation. Bradley's laugh held no humor. "I had a lot of time to think these past few days, about what I did, about why I did it." He met his mother's eyes directly. "Maybe I need to face actual consequences for once." Patricia's expression hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. One moment of poor judgment shouldn't derail your entire future." "It's not one moment, Mom. You know that." Bradley's voice dropped. "The Martinez girl isn't the first. She's just the first with video evidence you couldn't bury." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia Thompson had built her life around carefully constructed appearances, the perfect political wife, the devoted mother, the community leader beyond reproach. Bradley's words threatened to shatter that carefully maintained facade. "We'll discuss this when I return," she said, finally retrieving her purse with hands that trembled slightly. "Your father and I have always done what's best for you, Bradley. That hasn't changed." As she left, Bradley remained in the kitchen doorway watching her retreat. For the first time in his 18 years, he had glimpsed the depth of his parents' moral compromise, the lengths they had gone to insulate him from the natural consequences of his actions. And he had begun to understand how that protection had shaped him into someone he was no longer sure he wanted to be. The Martinez home stood in stark contrast to the Thompson residence, a modest two-bedroom bungalow in Oak Ridge's working-class East Side with weathered siding that needed painting and a small front yard kept neat through Roberto's weekend efforts. Patricia Thompson sat in her luxury SUV across the street, gathering her resolve before approaching. She had done this before, discreet visits to quietly resolve unfortunate situations involving Bradley or, years earlier, Richard. The conversations were always different, but followed the same essential pattern: express sympathy, suggest mutual benefit in avoiding prolonged conflict. Present the financial offer as a practical solution rather than a bribe. Most families accepted, grateful for the unexpected windfall and relief from continued stress. The Martinez home, however, presented a new challenge. No lights were visible through the windows. No vehicles sat in the driveway. After 15 minutes of waiting, Patricia was forced to accept that no one was home. The direct approach would have to wait. She reached for her phone instead, accessing the list of contacts she had assembled after the initial incident. Roberto Martinez worked at Peterson's Auto Repair until 6:00 p.m. Sophia should be at school, though reports indicated she had been spending after-school hours at the library lately. Rather than wait, Patricia decided to shift tactics. She started her vehicle and drove to her next destination, a small law office on Main Street, where James Calloway would be waiting to discuss alternative approaches. Meanwhile, across town at Oak Ridge High, Frank Sullivan was making a discovery that would dramatically accelerate the unfolding crisis. After his regular morning rounds, he had returned to his security office to find the door slightly ajar, unusual, since he always locked it when leaving. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed at first glance. His desk remained organized, his filing cabinet closed. But when he attempted to access his computer, the password failed. After 3 unsuccessful attempts, a message appeared on screen. "System access revoked. Contact IT administrator. Frank immediately checked his personal items. The flash drive containing copies of the security footage was missing from the locked drawer where he had secured it. So was the brass key Eleanor Davis had given him to access the archive room. Someone had breached his office, compromised his computer, and stolen key evidence. The system was closing ranks, eliminating threats to its continued operation. He reached for his cell phone to call Michael Davis, then hesitated. If his office had been compromised, his communications might be monitored as well. Using the school's landline would be equally risky. Instead, he logged out of the compromised computer and left his office, locking the door behind him. As he walked through the main hallway toward the administration wing, he noticed Carl Jenkins, the school's IT administrator, watching him from the computer lab doorway. The younger man quickly averted his eyes when Frank looked in his direction. Rather than confronting Jenkins directly, Frank continued to the main office, where he requested a meeting with Principal Reynolds. "She's in a conference call," Mrs. Winters informed him. "Can I tell her what it's regarding?" "Security concerns," Frank said vaguely. "I'll wait." He settled into one of the visitor chairs, maintaining a calm exterior despite his growing alarm. The stolen evidence, the compromised computer, someone was systematically removing his ability to expose what he and Sophia had discovered. The backpack containing the physical files they had taken from the archive was secure in his truck, locked in a concealed compartment beneath the rear seat. But without the video evidence to corroborate Bradley's actions, the historical pattern would be easier to dismiss as irrelevant to the current case. After 20 minutes of waiting, Mrs. Winters received a message on her computer. "Principal Reynolds can see you now, Mr. Sullivan." Barbara Reynolds's office presented its usual immaculate appearance, awards and diplomas precisely arranged on the walls. Family photos in tasteful frames on her desk, everything conveying professional competence and personal warmth. The principal herself sat behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a document. "Frank," she greeted him without looking up. "What security concerns bring you here today?" "My office was accessed without authorization," he stated flatly. "Evidence in the Thompson case has been removed and my computer access revoked." Now Reynolds did look up, her expression carefully neutral. "That's a serious allegation. Do you have proof your office was breached?" "The missing evidence is proof enough," Frank countered. "The flash drive containing the cafeteria footage is gone along with other items related to the investigation." Reynolds removed her glasses, setting them aside deliberately. "The footage in question was officially transferred to the police department and the district's legal team yesterday. Perhaps you misplaced your personal copy." The careful phrasing, "personal copy," indicated she knew he had made duplicates without authorization. Frank maintained his professional demeanor despite the implicit accusation. "And my computer access, a system-wide security update," Reynolds explained smoothly. "Several staff members have reported similar issues. It is addressing them in order of priority." Every explanation was plausible in isolation. Together they formed a pattern Frank recognized from his detective days, the systematic removal of evidence and isolation of a potential whistleblower. "I see," he said simply. "And when can I expect my access to be restored?" "That would be a question for the IT department." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Is there anything else, Frank? I have another meeting in 5 minutes." He recognized the dismissal, but wasn't quite ready to leave. "One more thing. The sealed records beneath the library, the ones documenting decades of covered-up incidents involving prominent families like the Thompsons. What happens to those when all this is over?" The change in Reynolds's expression was subtle but unmistakable. A momentary widening of the eyes, a slight paling beneath her makeup. She recovered quickly, but not before Frank had his confirmation she knew exactly what records he was referring to. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," she said, her voice perfectly steady. despite the lie. The school's archived records are maintained according to district policy and state law. Frank nodded, having gotten the answer he needed without her saying a word. Of course. My mistake. He stood to leave. Thank you for your time, Principal Reynolds. As he walked out of the administration wing, Frank's mind raced with implications, his security access, compromised evidence, disappearing. Reynolds clearly involved in the cover-up, the system was moving faster than he had anticipated to contain the threat he and Sophia represented. He needed to accelerate his own timeline. The contact at the State Attorney General's office couldn't wait until tomorrow, and Sophia needed to be warned immediately that the situation had escalated. As he turned toward the senior hallway, where Sophia would be in English class, Frank felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Carl Jenkins, the IT administrator, standing uncomfortably close. "Security update should be complete by end of day," Jenkins said, his voice pitched low. "Until then, maybe best to use the time for something else." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward the exit. Off campus. The message was clear: leave now, voluntarily, or be removed. Frank studied the younger man, noting the nervous sweat at his temples, the way his eyes couldn't quite meet Frank's directly. "Thanks for the update," Frank replied evenly. "I think I'll take your advice." As he walked toward the exit, Frank sent a text message to the one person he knew wasn't compromised by the Thompson influence. "Meet me at Wilson's. Urgent. Bring S, if possible. System compromised." Michael Davis would understand the reference to George Wilson's store, and with luck, he could get word to Sophia before the school administration realized the extent of what they had discovered in the archive beneath the library. Frank pushed through the main doors into the bright October sunshine, aware that he might never return to Oak Ridge High as its head of security. After 3 years of watching, documenting, and waiting for the right moment, events were now moving with unstoppable momentum. The long-buried secrets of Oak Ridge were finally rising to the surface. And like all secrets kept too long in darkness, their emergence into light would change everything. The Silver Dollar filling station stood as a weathered sentinel at the crossroads where Oak Ridge's town limits dissolved into rolling farmland. Late morning sunlight glinted off its faded metal sign, the vintage gas pumps long dry but preserved as nostalgic decoration. Inside, the scent of coffee and old wood mingled with the peculiar blend of fishing bait and microwave burritos that constituted the store's primary merchandise. George Wilson looked up from his newspaper as the bell above the door announced Frank Sullivan's arrival. One glance at his friend's face told him everything he needed to know. "They moved faster than you expected," George stated, rather than asked, already reaching beneath the counter for the coffee pot. Frank nodded grimly, accepting the steaming mug with a grateful nod. "Office breached. Evidence missing. Computer access revoked." He kept his voice low despite the empty store. "They know we found the archive." George whistled softly. "Reynolds, definitely involved. Probably others, too." Frank took a long sip of coffee, the familiar bitter warmth steadying him. "I texted Michael to meet us here, asked him to bring Sophia if possible. The girl's in danger." Frank considered this carefully. "Not physically, not yet. But they'll try to isolate her, pressure her to recant or accept a settlement." He set his mug down with controlled precision. "The Thompsons can't afford to let this become public, not just Bradley's actions, but the decades of similar incidents they've buried." George nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. At 70, he had witnessed the Thompson family's influence over Oak Ridge for most of his life. First as a returning Vietnam veteran struggling to find his place, then as a small business owner constantly navigating the town's complex power dynamics. "Your truck clean?" he asked pragmatically. Frank shook his head. Can't be sure. Might have been tagged while I was inside the school. Without further discussion, George limped to the back room, his prosthetic leg making a distinctive rhythm on the worn floorboards. He returned moments later with a set of keys. Take my old Chevy. It's behind the store. Not much to look at, but the engine's solid. He pressed the keys into Frank's hand. What's your play here, Sullivan? Frank pocketed the keys, grateful for his friend's unquestioning support. Get the evidence to the State Attorney General's office in Lansing. Michael's sister has been documenting similar patterns for years. Combined with what we found in the archive, it should be enough to trigger an official investigation, one beyond the Thompsons' influence. The bell above the door jingled again as Michael Davis entered, still in his police uniform. He nodded to both men, his expression carefully neutral, but his posture alert. Couldn't reach the girl, he said without preamble. School says she's absent today. RCA called in sick this morning. Frank frowned. That doesn't make sense. She was fine yesterday evening. Roberto called her in, Michael clarified. I spoke to him after getting your text. They're at the old Martinez farm. He got a call from the bank this morning, something about irregularities with his mortgage that required immediate attention. Convenient timing, Frank observed darkly. Too convenient, Michael agreed. The bank president plays golf with Mayor Thompson every Sunday. He glanced around the store, professional caution evident in his movements. What happened at the school? Frank outlined the morning's events, while George kept watch through the front windows, alert for any unfamiliar vehicles on the usually quiet road. They're moving on multiple fronts, Michael concluded when Frank finished. Financial pressure on Roberto, isolating you from evidence and school systems, probably monitoring communications too. Unstandard intimidation tactics, Frank agreed. But why now? Why so aggressively? Michael's weathered face hardened. Because my sister finally decided to come forward officially. She filed a formal statement with the school board this morning, documenting decades of covered-up incidents she's witnessed. After your discovery in the archive, she felt she couldn't stay silent any longer. Frank absorbed this news with growing concern. They'll come after her too. Already have, Michael confirmed grimly. Principal Reynolds called an emergency performance review for tomorrow morning. 45 years of exemplary service, and suddenly, they need to evaluate her classroom effectiveness weeks before retirement. The three men fell silent, each contemplating the rapidly escalating situation. What had begun as a single incident of school bullying was quickly expanding into a direct challenge to Oak Ridge's entrenched power structure, a system that had protected its own for generations. We need to consolidate, Frank said finally. Get everyone in one secure location, Sophia, Roberto, Eleanor, the evidence. Then make one coordinated move before they can pick us off individually. Michael nodded in agreement. The Martinez farm is our best option, remote enough to see anyone approaching, no digital surveillance to compromise. I'll close up shop and meet you there, George offered. Might be useful to have an extra set of eyes, and I've still got my service rifle from the Army. Seeing Frank's expression, he added, just precautionary. The Thompsons play hardball, but they're not stupid enough to try anything violent. Don't be so sure, Michael countered soberly. People with generational wealth and power don't surrender it easily when they feel truly threatened. He left the implication hanging. Frank drained his coffee and stood. I need to get the archive files from my truck, then head to the farm. Michael, can you get Eleanor? Already planned to. She's packing essentials now. Michael checked his watch. I'm officially on patrol for another 4 hours. Should give us some cover while we move everyone. As the men finalized their plans, none of them noticed the dark sedan parked behind the feed store across the street, or the telephoto lens capturing their meeting through the filling station's front window. The Martinez family farm sat nestled in a shallow valley 5 miles outside Oak Ridge proper. Originally purchased by Miguel Martinez in 1962, the 20-acre property had once been a thriving small operation producing vegetables for local markets. Now, with Miguel in Arizona, most of the land lay fallow, though the sturdy farmhouse and barn remained well-maintained. Sophia sat at the kitchen table sketching idly, while her father paced the worn linoleum floor, phone pressed to his ear. The morning's sudden evacuation from their home had left her disoriented and anxious, especially after Roberto had confiscated her cell phone as a precaution. "Yes, I understand the mortgage terms," Roberto was saying, his normally calm voice tight with controlled frustration. "What I don't understand is why after 15 years of perfect payment history, you're suddenly claiming there are documentation irregularities that could trigger default." Sophia couldn't hear the banker's response, but her father's expression darkened as he listened. "2 business days to produce additional documentation you already have in your files." Roberto rubbed his forehead wearily. "This feels like harassment, Mr. Lawson, especially given the timing." When he finally ended the call, Roberto slumped into the chair across from Sophia, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "What's happening, Dad?" Sophia asked quietly. "Why are we really here?" Roberto studied his daughter's face, weighing how much to share. At 17, Sophia had always seemed older than her years, thoughtful, observant, with a quiet maturity that sometimes made him forget she was still so young. Now, caught in the middle of a situation rapidly spinning beyond their control, she deserved the truth. "Officer Davis called early this morning," he began. "Said Frank Sullivan discovered his office had been breached, evidence in your case tampered with. Suggested we should leave home temporarily somewhere off the grid." Because of what we found in the archive, Sophia concluded the pieces falling into place. The records of all the other incidents the Thompsons covered up. Roberto's eyes widened slightly. "You knew about the archive. Frank said he was going to keep you out of that part." Sophia set down her pencil, meeting her father's gaze directly. "I was there, Dad. I helped him find it. There are decades of records down there, harassment, bullying, worse, all buried, because the perpetrators were from powerful families." "Dios mío," Roberto muttered, processing this revelation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Frank said it would be safer if fewer people knew," Sophia explained. "And after what's happening now, I think he was right." Roberto couldn't argue with that logic, though the thought of his daughter involved in something so potentially dangerous sent a cold spike of fear through him. "So they're coming after us because of these records, using the bank to pressure me," Sophia nodded slowly. "It's how they've always operated according to what we found. Financial pressure, threats to jobs, sudden problems with businesses or loans. They make problems disappear for the Thompsons by making life impossible for anyone who speaks up." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. Roberto moved quickly to the window, tension evident in his posture, until he recognized Frank Sullivan's familiar figure emerging from an unfamiliar truck. "It's Frank," he reported with relief. But not his vehicle. Moments later, Frank entered through the kitchen door, a weathered backpack clutched protectively under one arm. His expression was grim but determined as he set the bag on the table. "Sorry for the cloak and dagger routine," he said by way of greeting, "but we needed to get everyone somewhere secure." He nodded to Sophia. "You okay?" She nodded. "Better now that I know what's happening. Sort of." Frank unzipped the backpack, revealing the folders they had taken from the school archive. "They know we found these. My office was breached this morning, computer access revoked." Someone's systematically trying to contain the situation. The bank called about our mortgage, Roberto added, suddenly finding irregularities that never existed before. Classic intimidation tactic, Frank confirmed. They're trying to pressure you into dropping the complaint, make it cost more than it's worth to continue. It won't work, Roberto stated flatly, his jaw set in a determination that Sophia recognized from her own reflection. We don't back down from bullies, whether they're teenage boys or powerful families. Frank nodded, respect evident in his expression. Good, because this goes beyond just your case now. Eleanor Davis, Mrs. Davis from the History Department, filed a formal statement with the school board this morning, documenting similar patterns she's witnessed over decades. Mrs. Davis is involved too, Sophia asked, surprised. She's the one who told me about the archive in the first place, Frank explained. She's been keeping her own records for years. Michael's bringing her here soon. He spread several key documents across the table. With her testimony, these historical records, and the video evidence from your incident, we have enough to approach the State Attorney General's office directly. If the video evidence still exists, Roberto pointed out. You said your copies were taken. Frank's expression darkened. My flash drive is gone, yes, but I made other backups they don't know about, and Michael secured the official copy with the police department. He tapped one of the folders. Besides, the historical pattern is almost more damning than the current incident. It shows decades of systematic cover-ups, all protecting the same families. The kitchen fell silent as the three contemplated the documents spread before them, physical evidence of generations of abuse, harassment, and corruption. Names repeated across decades: Thompson, Calloway, Reynolds. Incidents buried, victims silenced, justice denied again and again. What happens now? Sophia finally asked, her voice small but steady. Frank checked his watch. Michael's bringing Eleanor here. George Wilson is closing his store and joining us too. Once everyone's assembled, I'll make the call to my contact at the Attorney General's office. We do this properly by the book, with everything documented and witnessed. And until then, Roberto asked, until then, we wait and watch. Frank moved to the window, scanning the approach to the farmhouse with practiced eyes. The Thompsons won't give up easily. They've controlled Oak Ridge too long to surrender without a fight. As if summoned by his words, another vehicle appeared on the distant gravel road leading to the farm, Michael Davis's personal SUV, followed by George Wilson's ancient pickup truck. Frank visibly relaxed at the sight of their allies approaching. The team's assembling, he said with grim satisfaction. Now, we just need to hold this position until we can get the evidence where it needs to go. None of them could have anticipated just how literal that defensive posture would become before the day ended. At Oak Ridge High School, the administrative wing buzzed with tense activity. Principal Barbara Reynolds had canceled her afternoon appointments, closing her office door for an emergency conference call with Mayor Richard Thompson and the school district's attorney. In the IT department, Carl Jenkins worked feverishly to scrub access logs and security footage showing Frank Sullivan's movements over the past week. The system was in full damage control mode, executing well-practiced protocols for containing potential scandals. But beneath the surface efficiency ran an undercurrent of genuine alarm. The situation was developing in ways their usual methods couldn't easily manage. Sullivan's gone off-grid, Jenkins reported anxiously when summoned to the principal's office. His phone's either powered down or the battery's been removed. No digital footprint since he left the building this morning. Principal Reynolds's carefully maintained composure showed signs of strain as she relayed this information to the phone on her desk set to speaker mode. That's unfortunate, but not unexpected. Mayor Thompson's voice emerged from the device, unnaturally calm. What about the Martinez girl and her father? Also unreachable, Reynolds confirmed. The girl was called in sick this morning. Roberto hasn't reported to work. And my sister, a new voice asked William Reynolds, the principal's husband and school board president, who had joined the call from his law office downtown. Eleanor's not answering her phone either, Barbara admitted. She filed that statement with the board office this morning, then left campus. Her afternoon classes have been covered by substitutes. A heavy silence followed this report, broken eventually by Mayor Thompson's measured voice. They're consolidating, getting everyone and everything in one place before making their move. The sound of ice clinking in a glass carried through the speaker. We need to locate them before they can reach anyone at the state level. Michael Davis is the key, William Reynolds suggested. He's Eleanor's brother. If anyone knows where they've gone, it's him. Davis is on patrol until 4, the mayor noted. I've already spoken with Chief Wilson about having him recalled to the station for an urgent matter. We'll know his whereabouts within the hour. Barbara Reynolds twisted the gold bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit she thought she had abandoned decades earlier. Richard, perhaps we should consider a different approach. If they do have documented evidence from the archive fighting this directly, could make things worse. Are you suggesting we simply surrender? The mayor's voice carried a dangerous edge. Allow decades of history to be rewritten because of one security tape and some dusty old files. Not surrender, Barbara clarified quickly, but maybe a strategic compromise. Bradley admits to a momentary lapse in judgment, takes a more substantial punishment. We implement new anti-harassment policies with actual teeth. Show we're addressing the issue seriously. And the historical records, William asked pointedly. The patterns those documents reveal, my involvement, yours, Richard's. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air between them. The current incident with Sofia Martinez was merely the visible portion of a much larger iceberg, one that could sink careers, reputations, and the carefully constructed power structure that had governed Oak Ridge for generations. We find them, Mayor Thompson said, finally, his tone leaving no room for debate. We contain the evidence. Then we can discuss appropriate responses and necessary compromises. The sound of another sip, another clink of ice. James Calloway is already preparing the necessary legal documentation for an emergency injunction. Once we locate Sullivan and the others, we'll have the court order within hours. As the call continued, none of the participants noticed Bradley Thompson standing silently in the hallway outside the principal's office, just beyond the sightline of Mrs. Winters at her desk. He had come to the school to retrieve textbooks for assignments during his suspension, using his father's master key to enter through a side door. What he had overheard confirmed suspicions that had been growing since his mother's strange conversation that morning. This wasn't just about his actions in the cafeteria anymore. Something much larger was unfolding, something that had his father mobilizing resources like a general preparing for war. Bradley slipped away before he could be discovered, questions churning in his mind. For the first time, he began to wonder if he was merely following a path his father had walked decades earlier. Not just in terms of achievements and status, but in darker ways he had never considered. The realization left him deeply unsettled as he drove away from the school, no longer certain of his place in the narrative unfolding around him. At the Martinez farm, the unlikely alliance had fully assembled. Eleanor Davis sat at the kitchen table with Frank Sullivan, systematically matching her personal records with the documents from the school archive. At 70, with reading glasses perched on her nose and her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, she projected an aura of academic precision. The patterns are remarkably consistent, she observed, tapping a folder from 1992. The same families, the same types of incidents, the same institutional responses across decades. It's almost formulaic. Michael Davis stood by the window, dividing his attention between the ongoing document review and the approach road to the farm. In his civilian clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt, he looked less like Oak Ridge's senior police officer and more like the farm boy he had been in his youth. "They'll have noticed I'm off radio by now," he noted, checking his watch. "Chief Wilson will be looking for me, especially after the mayor's call." George Wilson occupied a rocking chair in the corner, his prosthetic leg extended before him, his gnarled hands methodically cleaning a hunting rifle that he insisted was just precautionary. At his feet sat an ancient duffel bag containing what he called his Go Kit, emergency supplies he had maintained since returning from Vietnam, unable to fully shed the hypervigilance that combat had instilled. "Should have done this years ago," he muttered, more to himself than the room. "Watched this town rot from the inside out, did nothing but complain about it." Roberto and Sofia worked in the adjoining dining room, spreading out additional documents on the larger table there. The father-daughter team moved with similar methodical precision, organizing evidence by date and severity, creating a visual timeline of corruption that spanned nearly 50 years. "It's like a family business," Sophia observed quietly, noting how the Thompson name appeared with disturbing regularity across generations. Grandfather, father, son, all protected by the same system. Roberto nodded grimly. "Systems don't build themselves, mija. People create them, maintain them, benefit from them." He placed a careful hand on her shoulder. "And sometimes it takes people like us to dismantle them." Frank's voice carried from the kitchen. "We're almost ready. Once we've organized the key evidence, I'll call my contact at the Attorney General's office." He appeared in the doorway, holding up his specially purchased burner phone. "One call, and this goes beyond Oak Ridge's borders, beyond the Thompsons' reach." "They'll know what we're doing," Michael warned from his position by the window. "They'll try to stop us." "Let them try," Eleanor said with surprising steel in her voice. "I've spent 45 years watching injustice repeat itself in that school. I won't spend my retirement knowing I had one last chance to stop it," and remained silent. The room hummed with a strange energy, part tension, part resolve. These 6 individuals, drawn together by circumstance and courage, represented a direct challenge to a system that had operated unchecked for generations. Their very assembly in this farmhouse constituted an act of resistance unlike anything Oak Ridge had witnessed in living memory. Frank was about to respond when George raised a hand for silence, his head tilted toward the window. "Vehicle approaching," he reported quietly. "Not one I recognize." Michael joined him at the window, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. "Black SUV, government plates." His expression darkened. "Mayor's office." The room fell silent as the implications registered. Their location had been compromised sooner than expected. "How?" Roberto asked automatically, moving closer to Sofia. "No one knew we were here except us." "Doesn't matter now," Frank said tersely, gathering the most crucial documents into his backpack. "What matters is protecting the evidence and getting it to the right authorities." Michael made a quick decision. "I'll go out and stall them. Buy you some time." He turned to his sister. "Eleanor, you and Sophia take the back trail through the woods. Frank's truck is hidden behind the barn. Get to Lansing directly to the Attorney General's office. Don't stop for anything." "I'm staying with Sophia," Roberto insisted immediately. Michael shook his head. "They'll be watching for you together. Split up, create confusion. You come with me to confront whoever's out there." The sound of the vehicle growing closer forced their hand. Decisions had to be made instantly, without the luxury of debate. "He's right," Frank told Roberto. I'll protect Sophia with my life. You and Michael create a diversion. George, you're our rear guard. Make sure no one follows us through the woods." Roberto looked at his daughter, conflict evident in his expression. Sophia nodded, once her face pale but determined. "I'll be okay, Dad," she assured him. "We need to get these records to people who can actually do something with them." After a moment's hesitation, Roberto embraced her quickly. "Be careful, mija. I'll find you when this is over." As the group split into their assigned roles, the atmosphere shifted from tense planning to urgent action. Eleanor quickly transferred essential documents to a waterproof messenger bag while Frank secured his backpack. George checked his rifle one final time before taking up position at the rear window overlooking the wooded path. "Go now," Michael instructed as the sound of car doors slamming reached them from the front of the house. "Stay on the trail until you reach County Road 17, then head east. There's an old hunting cabin about 2 miles in that direction. Stop there only if absolutely necessary." Frank led Sophia and Eleanor toward the back door, pausing only to grasp Michael's shoulder briefly. "Just like Fallujah," he said, referencing a shared military past unknown to the others. "Hold the line." Michael nodded grimly. "Go save the world, Sullivan." As Frank, Sophia, and Eleanor slipped out the back door toward the wooded area behind the farm, Roberto and Michael moved toward the front entrance. George positioned himself at the rear window, rifle resting casually but ready across his lap, his experienced eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of flanking movements. The knock, when it came, was authoritative. Not the tentative tap of a visitor, but the confident rap of someone accustomed to doors opening at their command. Michael opened it to reveal James Calloway, the Thompsons' attorney, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, who practically screamed, "Private security." Behind them, a uniformed Oak Ridge police officer stood uncomfortably beside the SUV, clearly unhappy with his assignment. "Officer Davis," Calloway greeted him with professional neutrality, "this is unexpected. I was looking for Roberto Martinez." "That's me." Roberto stepped forward. "What can I do for you, Mr. Calloway?" The attorney held up an official-looking document. "I have an emergency court order authorizing the immediate seizure of certain materials allegedly removed from Oak Ridge High School property, materials that may constitute stolen confidential records." Michael's expression remained impassive. "May I see that order?" Calloway handed it over, watching carefully as Michael reviewed the document. As Oak Ridge's senior police officer, his presence complicated what should have been a straightforward intimidation tactic. "This order was issued by Judge Hamilton," Michael noted, referring to a jurist known for his close ties to the Thompson family. "Based on allegations without specific evidence, it's procedurally questionable at best." "Nevertheless, it is a valid court order," Calloway insisted smoothly. "We have reason to believe Mr. Martinez is in possession of confidential school records removed without authorization by Frank Sullivan, a school employee currently suspended pending investigation." Roberto crossed his arms. "I don't have any school records." "Then you won't mind if we verify that," Calloway responded, gesturing toward the house behind them. "The court order authorizes a complete search of the premises." Michael handed the document back with deliberate slowness. "Mr. Martinez and I were just leaving, actually. Family emergency in Detroit. The house is locked up." One of the security men stepped forward. "We observed multiple vehicles arriving earlier. There are clearly other people inside." The standoff teetered on the edge of confrontation, neither side willing to back down. In the tense silence, the distant sound of an engine starting carried from behind the farmhouse Frank's borrowed truck, beginning its escape with the crucial evidence. Calloway's head turned toward the sound, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What was that?" "Farm equipment," Roberto improvised quickly. "Timer-based irrigation system." The security men exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. One began moving toward the side of the house for a better view of the rear property. "I wouldn't," Michael cautioned, his hand casually moving toward his hip, where his service weapon would normally be holstered. Though currently unarmed in his civilian clothes, the practiced movement carried an unmistakable warning. The security man hesitated, looking to Calloway for direction. The lawyer assessed the situation with cold calculation, weighing the risks of escalation against his primary objective. "Check the outbuildings," he instructed the men. "If you encounter anyone, detain them for questioning regarding the missing records." As the security personnel moved toward the barn, Michael and Roberto maintained their positions at the front door, physically blocking entry to the house itself. The uniformed officer remained by the SUV, his discomfort with the situation increasingly evident. Inside, George Wilson watched the unfolding scene through various windows, dividing his attention between the confrontation at the front and the escape route through the woods. So far, no one had moved to cut off the rear path, suggesting the Thompson forces hadn't fully secured the perimeter. With practiced patience, he settled in for what military strategists call a delaying action, not designed to win, but to buy crucial time for the main objective to succeed. In this case, getting Sophia Eleanor and the evidence safely away from Oak Ridge and beyond the Thompsons' influence. The dense woods behind the Martinez farm offered good cover, but challenging terrain. Frank led the way along a narrow trail, his military training evident in his movement, quiet, efficient, alert to potential threats. Eleanor followed with surprising stamina for her age, the waterproof messenger bag secured across her body. Sophia brought up the rear, her artist's eye noting details, even in their hurried passage, the quality of light filtering through autumn leaves, the texture of bark on ancient oaks, the way shadow and substance merged in the forest's depth. "We should hear the truck soon," Frank said quietly, pausing to help Eleanor over a fallen log. "I had George hide it about a quarter-mile in just past the creek bend." Eleanor nodded, somewhat breathless but determined. "Will Michael and Roberto be all right?" "Michael knows what he's doing," Frank assured her. "And your brother has more allies in the department than the Thompsons realize. They'll create confusion, buy us time to get clear." Sophia glanced back toward the farmhouse, now hidden by the thick forest. "What if they follow our trail?" "George will delay them," Frank said with simple confidence, "and we'll be long gone before they can organize a proper search." They continued in silence for several minutes, following the path as it wound deeper into the woods. The distant sound of running water announced their approach to the small creek that bisected the Martinez property. As they crossed the shallow water on stepping stones placed decades earlier by Miguel Martinez, Sophia felt a strange sense of connection to her family's history. Her grandfather had fled political oppression in his homeland, built a new life in America, raised a family on this land. Now, she was fleeing across the same property, carrying evidence of a different kind of oppression, more subtle but no less damaging. The irony wasn't lost on her even in their urgent flight. Beyond the creek, the path narrowed further, climbing a gentle slope toward where Frank had concealed the borrowed truck. They were perhaps halfway up when the first shout reached them, distant but distinct, coming from the direction of the farmhouse. "They've figured out we're gone," Frank observed grimly. "Move faster." They quickened their pace, Eleanor now visibly struggling with the exertion, but refusing assistance. At 70, her academic life had not prepared her for woodland escape routes, but decades of moral conviction provided a different kind of endurance. "Almost there," Frank encouraged as they crested the slope, "just beyond those pines." The old Chevy stood partially concealed by evergreen branches, exactly where George had suggested hiding it. Frank quickly brushed away the camouflage opening doors for Eleanor and Sophia before sliding behind the wheel. The engine caught on the first try, a testament to George's mechanical skills despite the vehicle's weathered appearance. "Stay low," Frank instructed as they began moving slowly along the crude forest track. "We'll connect with the county road about a mile ahead. Then it's a straight shot to the highway." Eleanor clutched the messenger bag protectively against her chest, the collected evidence of her decades-long vigil finally moving toward proper authorities. "After all these years," she murmured, "I can hardly believe it's actually happening." Sophia reached across the seat to squeeze the older woman's hand. "Because of you," she said simply. "You kept records when no one else would. You remembered when everyone else chose to forget." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. "No, my dear. It's because of you. You had the courage to stand up when it mattered most." Frank navigated the rough track with careful precision, keeping their speed moderate to avoid drawing attention with excessive noise or dust. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded, suggesting the delay tactics at the farmhouse were working as planned. "Once we reach the main road, we're still about 90 minutes from Lansing," he explained, keeping his voice calm, despite the tension evident in his posture. "My contact at the Attorney General's office is expecting us by late afternoon. We just need to stay ahead of whatever the Thompsons try next." "Which will be what?" Sophia asked, trying to anticipate potential threats. Frank considered this as he maneuvered around a particularly deep rut. "They'll call ahead to local law enforcement, probably claim we've stolen confidential records, try to set up roadblocks or traffic stops," and his mouth set in a grim line. "That's why we're taking back roads all the way to Lansing. Longer route, but fewer opportunities for interception." The truck broke free of the tree line, emerging onto a narrow dirt road that served as a maintenance access for the rural power lines. Frank turned east, away from Oak Ridge, accelerating now that they had better surface conditions. For several miles they traveled in tense silence, each processing the dramatic escalation of what had begun as a simple stand against school bullying. The rural landscape rolled past scattered farms, fallow autumn fields, the occasional cluster of mailboxes marking invisible property boundaries. Sophia found herself studying Eleanor's profile against the passenger window, the dignified slope of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the eyes that had witnessed decades of institutional failure, yet maintained their fundamental kindness. She wondered if she would have the same strength after 45 years of witnessing injustice, or if she would have eventually surrendered to the path of least resistance like so many others in Oak Ridge. "We're being followed," Frank announced calmly, interrupting her thoughts. "Black sedan about half a mile back. Maintaining distance, but definitely tracking us." Eleanor twisted in her seat to look through the rear window. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Could be coincidence," Frank said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Or they could have split their forces, sent someone to watch the back roads, while the main group confronted Michael and Roberto." "What do we do?" Sophia asked, fear mingling with determination in her voice. Frank checked his mirrors again, assessing options with professional detachment. "We stay calm. Stick to the plan. They may be watching, but they can't stop us without creating a very public incident." He patted the burner phone in his pocket. "And I can still make the call to Lansing, have people waiting for us when we arrive." As if responding to an unspoken cue, the black sedan accelerated, closing the distance between the vehicles. Frank's expression hardened as he recognized the driver through the windshield, Carl Jenkins, the school's IT administrator, who had warned him to leave campus that morning. "Interesting choice of messenger," he muttered, maintaining their current speed to avoid escalating the situation. The sedan pulled alongside their truck, keeping pace on the narrow country road. Jenkins gestured for them to pull over, his expression urgent, rather than threatening. "Don't stop," Eleanor said immediately. "It's a trap." Frank nodded in agreement, but curiosity flickered across his features as he studied Jenkins through the side window. "He's alone, no visible backup, and he was the one who warned me earlier." As they continued side by side at a steady 40 miles per hour, Jenkins held up a small object for them to see, a flash drive identical to the one stolen from Frank's office that morning. "The missing evidence," Frank realized aloud. "He's returning it." "Or it's a fake," Eleanor countered skeptically. "A way to get us to stop." Before Frank could decide how to respond, Jenkins's sedan suddenly accelerated, pulling ahead of them and then slowing directly in their path, forcing Frank to brake to avoid a collision. "What's he doing?" Sophia asked anxiously as their truck slowed to a crawl behind the sedan. Jenkins emerged from his vehicle, the flash drive held clearly visible in his outstretched hand. His expression communicated urgency rather than hostility as he approached their truck. Frank made a swift decision, lowering his window partially, but keeping the engine running. "That's far enough," he called when Jenkins was about 10 feet away. "What do you want?" "To help," Jenkins replied, his voice tight with evident stress. "I made a copy before they ordered me to delete the original footage." He held up the flash drive. "It's all here, the cafeteria incident plus security footage of Mayor Thompson and Principal Reynolds entering your office this morning, proof of tampering with evidence." Frank studied him with professional suspicion. "Why the change of heart?" Jenkins glanced nervously up and down the empty road. "Because I have a 16-year-old daughter who looks at me like I'm some kind of hero. And this morning, helping them cover up what that Thompson kid did." He shook his head. "I couldn't look her in the eye anymore." The simple human truth of this explanation resonated with all three occupants of the truck. After a moment's consideration, Frank extended his hand through the partially opened window. "Thank you," he said simply, as Jenkins handed over the flash drive. The IT administrator nodded once, then added urgently, "They're monitoring police channels, setting up checkpoints on the main routes to Lansing. Take County Road 17 to the old fire tower, then use the Forest Service roads. It's longer, but unmonitored." Without waiting for a response, he returned to his sedan and executed a rapid three-point turn, heading back in the direction of Oak Ridge without another word. Frank examined the flash drive carefully before pocketing it alongside the burner phone. That was unexpected. "Can we trust him?" Eleanor asked pragmatically. "Or what he gave us?" "We'll verify the contents when we reach the Attorney General's office," Frank decided. "But his warning about checkpoints matches what I would do in their position." He turned the truck onto a side road following Jenkins's suggested alternate route. Sometimes conscience wins out over self-interest. Not often, but sometimes. As they continued their journey along increasingly remote roads, the confrontation back at the Martinez farm was reaching its own resolution. The security personnel had completed their search of the outbuildings, finding nothing but farm equipment and decades of accumulated storage. Their frustration was evident as they reported back to Calloway. No sign of Sullivan or the Davis woman, one confirmed, and no documents matching the description in the court order. Calloway's professional composure showed signs of strain as he realized the extent to which they had been outmaneuvered. "They've fled with the evidence," he concluded, turning back to Michael and Roberto. "Where are they going?" "As I mentioned, family emergency in Detroit," Michael repeated calmly. "Mr. Martinez and I were just leaving to join them when you arrived." The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "This obstruction will have consequences, Officer Davis, for you professionally and for Mr. Martinez personally." "Is that a threat?" Roberto asked directly, standing straighter, despite the substantial height difference between himself and the security personnel flanking Calloway. Merely an observation, Calloway replied smoothly. Actions have consequences. Mayor Thompson has been extraordinarily patient with this situation, but patience has limits. The uniformed officer, who had remained by the SUV, finally approached, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Mr. Calloway, the court order has been executed. The premises have been searched as authorized. There's no legal basis for further action at this location. Calloway regarded the young officer with thinly veiled contempt. Thank you for your legal assessment, Officer Parker. I'm sure your expertise in constitutional law is most impressive. Michael stepped slightly forward, a subtle move that placed him protectively between Roberto and the increasingly hostile visitors. The officer is correct. Your business here is concluded. I suggest you leave private property before this becomes a matter of trespassing. The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats before Calloway finally nodded to his security team. We're done here, for now. He turned back to Michael and Roberto. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. As the group returned to their vehicle, George Wilson watched from the rear window of the farmhouse, rifle still casually positioned across his lap. Only when the SUV had disappeared down the gravel drive did he allow himself a small smile of satisfaction. Round one to the good guys, he murmured to himself, finally setting the rifle aside. Hope Sullivan and the others are making good time. Indeed, Frank's truck was now deep in the network of Forest Service roads that crisscrossed the state land between Oak Ridge and Lansing. The unpaved tracks were rough but passable, winding through dense woodland that glowed with autumn colors in the late afternoon sunlight. Should reach the main highway in about 20 minutes, Frank reported, checking a paper map spread across the steering wheel during a brief stop. From there, another hour to Lansing. Eleanor nodded, fatigue evident in her posture, but determination undiminished. And your contact will meet us there. Called him while you were stretching your legs, Frank confirmed, indicating the burner phone. Assistant Attorney General James Morrison. We served together in the first Gulf War before he went to law school. He's expecting us by 6, has a team standing by to secure the evidence and take formal statements. Sophia, who had been quietly processing the day's dramatic events, finally voiced the question that had been building within her. What happens after that? To Bradley, to Principal Reynolds, to all of them? Frank considered this carefully before answering. The evidence we're bringing establishes a pattern of institutional corruption spanning decades. That kind of case takes time to build properly. He folded the map with practiced efficiency. Bradley will likely face juvenile charges for the incident in the cafeteria. The adults involved in the cover-up, more serious consequences, potentially criminal charges for obstruction, evidence tampering, maybe even conspiracy. And Oak Ridge itself, Eleanor asked softly. The town has been shaped by the Thompson influence for generations. Communities can heal once the source of corruption is removed, Frank said, though uncertainty flickered briefly across his weathered features. It won't happen overnight, but systems can be reformed if enough people demand change. They continued their journey in thoughtful silence, each contemplating the potential ramifications of their actions. What had begun as one girl's stand against a school bully had expanded into a direct challenge to decades of entrenched power and systematic corruption. The outcome remained uncertain, the cost potentially high, but the necessity of their actions undeniable. As the truck emerged from the forest onto the main highway leading to Lansing, the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and golds. Sophia found herself sketching the scene in her mind, storing details for future rendering, the quality of light, the silhouette of pine trees against the fading day, the determined profiles of her unlikely allies. Whatever happened next, this moment, this journey had already changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The quiet girl who had spent years avoiding attention had found her voice and her courage when it mattered most. That transformation, regardless of the legal outcomes ahead, represented its own form of victory against the systems designed to silence those who dared to challenge the powerful. In Lansing, as evening settled over the capital city, Assistant Attorney General James Morrison waited in his office, having cleared his schedule upon receiving Frank Sullivan's call. The evidence these witnesses were bringing, historical records, security footage firsthand. Accounts potentially constituted one of the most significant public corruption cases his office had seen in years. As his team prepared interview rooms and evidence processing protocols, Morrison contemplated the courage required for these individuals to stand against a system that had silenced so many before them. Particularly, the young woman at the center of it all, Sophia Martinez, whose simple refusal to accept harassment had triggered a chain of events that might finally bring accountability to generations of abuse and corruption. Sometimes he reflected the most profound changes begin not with grand gestures or revolutionary declarations, but with one person simply saying, "No more," and meaning it. The sun disappeared beyond the horizon as Frank's truck continued its steady progress toward Lansing. In the growing darkness, the headlights illuminated the road ahead, a path leading not just to the state capitol, but toward a future where the powerful could no longer count on silence and fear to protect them from the consequences of their actions. For Sophia Martinez, for Eleanor Davis, for Frank Sullivan, and for countless unnamed victims across decades of buried incidents, that future represented the justice too long denied, the accountability too long avoided, and the healing too long delayed. It represented, in its most fundamental sense, the America that should be, rather than the one that had been allowed to exist in the shadows of power and privilege. As Lansing's lights appeared in the distance, Sophia felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun in humiliation and isolation in a school cafeteria was approaching its resolution in the halls of justice, where even the most powerful must eventually answer for their actions. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them with the same quiet courage that had brought her to this moment, standing up not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced before her. The light of truth, once ignited, cannot easily be extinguished. And in Oak Ridge, Michigan, that light was about to illuminate decades of darkness.